Folks ready? All right. I will call to order this meeting of the East Hampton Planning Board for Tuesday, July 18th, 2017. First of all, is there anyone to speak to anything tonight that is not on the agenda? All right. Moving right along, Planning Board meeting minutes for our June 20th meeting. Everybody have a chance to look at that?
Mm-hmm.
Any errors, omissions, corrections?
No. I make a motion we accept the minutes of the June 20th meeting.
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, all right. First order of business, A&R for Plum Brook Drive, William Gruber. Is there someone to speak to that?
Yeah.
All right. Come on up and,
This piece of land on Plum
I'm
Brook.
going to the podium for the
yeah.
My name is Bill Gruber. I'm the owner of this piece of land we're talking about. It's at the end of Plum Brook Drive in East Hampton. It's a strip of land that was left over when we put a subdivision in at the end of the cul-de-sac. And we just tried to sell it to Mr. Rizudek, who owns the land on the other side. But he didn't want it, so the two neighbors are gonna buy it. And we just need the plan approved to have them do that.
So both of those parcels are gonna be conveyed to the neighbors on each side of them? Is
Yeah,
that the way it
right.
works? Okay.
So this is expanding here and this is expanding there.
Yeah, but I think right now it's just the division in half.
Space.
So it looks like there's frontage.
Well, yeah, it's going to them.
Anybody have any questions?
I motion to endorse.
Well, hold on. Planning Department, do you have any comments?
I believe there's somebody from the public here who might want to speak to this.
Is there someone in the
item.
public with a comment? Come on up.
It's unusual.
Hi, Mr. Rizudek. And I never had a look at the plan.
It's right over here if you want to come over, yeah.
So let's see.
So you're here.
Yeah, I own this half here.
And it
It's a
references
right of way.
Right
Let's go.
away, yep.
Goes. He owns 20 feet. I own 20 feet.
Yeah,
Yeah, he offered me to me, but it was way too expensive.
Okay. No? That's
He
Okay.
wanted me just to buy this little section here.
okay, so do you have any issue with the division though? I mean, basically we're limited here to just looking at the frontage on the public way and making sure that it's sufficient. It doesn't, our endorsement is merely that the lots as divided each have sufficient frontage on a public way, so there's not much of an analysis beyond that as far as buildability or anything of that nature.
I'm currently building here.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, none of that really impacts this.
As long as it doesn't affect my easement.
I mean, it should, I mean, all we endorse it as is that it has sufficient frontage, so there's no other ruling that's a part of this.
Sufficient frontage for who?
On the two lots on the
100
property.
feet.
Where's the 100 feet?
It's on the Plum Brook. It's on the
It's not a
Plum Brook.
Plum
It's on
Brook.
the, yeah, it's
On
in the
here.
cul-de-sac.
Okay, that's a cul-de-sac.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the frontage.
And oh, okay, you're including, so he's dividing, kind of hard to see this.
This
upside
whole
down.
lot is going to split there into the two sides.
Split here?
Yeah. To
Well,
these
I
points.
I have an easement here.
You own this.
To these 2
And
points.
also I have a right of way to
Right.
cross over here,
Is that what those dash lines
which is,
are?
yeah, which
Yep.
is where my driveway is going
Yep.
to my current house I'm building. Does that affect that?
Nope,
No.
shouldn't have any impact on whatever the
Has
right of way is.
nothing to do with it.
And it doesn't affect my easement
No.
for the whole length of it.
Should have no
No.
impact on the easement.
Okay, so,
All it's dividing a parcel between two
Can't quite see
other
What's the
parcels.
distance here of this?
109.
yeah, those are probably legal, yeah. So he's given half of it to these people and the other half to these people?
Well, he says that's his plan, but that This is literally just to split this parcel
Oh,
as it's
okay.
shown on this plan. That's all it
yeah,
does.
I have no issues with that.
Okay, great. All right. Any other questions or comments from the board?
No,
All right.
I motion to endorse the A&R for William Gruber at Plum Brook Drive.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, all right. Start signing.
I already wrote, okay. Oh, shoot. I forgot my minutes. Did you bring any minutes? Did you bring any minutes?
Yeah. You need the application too, Jess?
Yes, so add to it.
All right, moving right along. Continued public hearing of the City Council Ordinance Subcommittee for the zoning amendment with seasonal cottage community. You folks want to open up your...
All in favor? Aye. Okay, we're good.
All right, I assume you guys all got a copy of the latest version that Planning Department prepared?
I have extra copies here, if you need them. Let's see.
I'd like to get one.
Anything else?
Could I get one?
I mailed you one.
I know, but
Put it in the mail.
I know. It's still in the.
It's right here.
Oh. It's print?
I'm gonna pass out the rest of the copies to the public if nobody else needs them.
Okay, thanks. I'm
If anybody
sorry, I
would like a
did
copy
miss
of the
it.
latest version, I'm gonna put them here and
You
also
see
pass
that?
it to sign in.
You
if
get
you
one
have
of
to
these?
sign it.
You see the copies she's got? They're full copies. They're big writing. Look at them.
Oh, look at that.
No, but at least she typed them out. I need a magnifying glass. No. See, it was by
Okay, so based on our last hearing, there were a couple comments, there were a couple changes to this draft. One was, there was a provision added in this draft that required that each unit will have interior sanitary facilities and kitchen facilities and meet the requirements of the Massachusetts State Building Code. And then there were a couple questions that we had flagged to discuss. One was whether there should be a time limit set for rentals between April and November. And then a couple other items, whether there should be an acreage or open space set-aside limitation different for each zoning district. For instance, should the open space set-aside be higher for the R80 zone versus the R35 zone? And also, should there be additional buffer requirements for sound mitigation? I don't know if anybody has questions, or if we want to open this up for public comment, or...
We did get correspondence from the health agent. too.
Right, I
Yes.
was gonna mention that too, which there was some good data in that document.
One thing that really stuck out to me was the comment she made about residing there more than 90 days. and
Yeah.
its effect on taxation and school enrollment.
Right, I actually keyed in on that too. In Hilltowns, there's a limited to the seasonal period, not more than 90 days, so as not to meet the definition of residency, which added children to their school system. That may not be a concern for East Hampton, but apparently you have residency in a community if you reside there for more than 90 days. And that was big for me.
I'm not sure if that's technically accurate either. I mean, I think with the school stuff, you pretty instantly come under the coverage of
Is that right?
of schools once you move here. I mean, there's
Right,
been
this isn't
cases
moving,
even,
but
I know, but
that's-
even sort of homeless families or families that, you know, a child comes and lives with a grandparent, it's basically, I think, as soon as you sort of indefinitely change your domicile, you fall under the school, or entitlement to school, but
But what counts as a domicile?
it's literally just once you set up a
So a hotel
resident.
room is a
If you,
domicile.
if you don't have an intention, like a plan to leave, basically. So, that, I mean, anybody can sort of have themselves fall under entitlement to come to the schools, I think, pretty easily. I don't know the other issues, but I'm not sure that that's on its face necessarily currently the law.
Is your PA system working? Because it's not very easy
We don't have a
to hear.
PA system.
PA system doesn't work?
We don't have one.
It's recording, it doesn't amplify.
Really hard to hear. So
Okay.
just speak up,
We'll-
everybody.
we'll try to
You
speak
gotta
up.
speak up, nobody could hear.
Okay.
Just for edification, would be okay if I read 10.02, number 2.
Sure.
That says, the seasonal cottage community may be open between April 1st and November 30th, inclusive. The seasonal cottage community may provide for short-term use up to 7 days in any 30-day period per tenant during the remainder of the year, provided that there is an occupancy permit which ensure water and sanitary facilities are provided. So we're talking about when can you be there. And it's basically essentially saying roughly 9 months, you can be there the entire time, and the rest of the time up to a week, the off-season. I think JP and I had a little bit of discourse at the last meeting, if I remember correctly, that both of us felt that 90 days might be a little too long. Am I putting words in your mouth? Do you still feel 90 days is a little too long? I'm sorry, not 90, the 9 months.
9 months seems like a real long time.
So we agree on that, I think.
Yeah.
I'm open to suggestions, if people have ideas.
90 days.
Yeah, I mean, just going by I would tend to agree with that, just from reading the health department's assessment, and then 90 days seems reasonable to me.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
90 days.
90 days.
Total or 90 days in a row? I mean,
90 days total, I
in any
would
given
think.
year? Is that what you would suggest, Al?
Yeah.
90 days in any given year?
That's what I would think too.
The other thing that you might consider for those who are in favor of this, that April 1 through November 1 be the time frame.
With no winter visits?
No winter,
No off-season.
no off-season.
What's
I mean,
the
if we're seasonal, I think in this,
right? But there's 4 seasons, so I mean, I don't see the problem with having a winter residency, because there's plenty of winter activities to do here. So I don't see winter being an issue, as long as the owners
Right.
are willing to have people in their cottages and willing to provide all the, make sure that the water and sewer are on, that the parking area is plowed. I don't really see an issue with relegating it to just summer.
Frankly, I wonder, even given that we do have a lot of winter activities, why we're having a seasonal component to it.
Yeah, I actually was thinking about that too. Why have the no more than a week in a winter, why not just say 90 days and call it that?
No one can stay more than 90 days in any year.
Any
In a
calendar
given
year.
year.
Now, Jackie's comments did say 90 days might trip that thing, but I know that's contentious and it might not apply. So I wonder if maybe going slightly under 90 might be, because I mean that's really for me what I'm trying to avoid is, affecting the school systems
Yeah.
with a burden.
No, I would think 90 days would,
Yeah, Jackie says not more than 90 days. I mean,
Right,
I don't know
so-
if that was very calculated language or not, but I would think 90 days would
I
work.
mean, I would think if that's our concern about tripping the school system, then we probably should get an opinion from town council, because I don't think that the 90 days makes a difference for the school system.
no,
Right,
I
and-
don't
and I'm
think
not-
so either.
I'm not opposed to hearing Jim's idea, because I feel like the spirit of this is for something that would be more you know, for people that are coming into town to take advantage of the things that we have, not
Right.
to live
Right.
necessarily an extended time here.
Right.
You know, so if your kids are graduating from Smith College, you can stay in a more rustic setting outside of Northampton. Or if you want to come for, you know, cultural chaos or whatever, you want to come cross-country skiing.
Right,
But staying 3 months might be,
Yeah.
right.
so I'm fine with I mean, at least for what the spirit of what I see this as. You know,
I think
which
the
is-
winter stuff too, to the extent that part of this is an idea that there would be a lodging option in East Hampton,
Yeah.
that I don't know why we would be less interested in giving people an opportunity, again, assuming a business wants to run year-round, that we would prohibit them from hosting people just as liberally in the winter as we would in the summer.
I agree.
But I also don't mind, I mean, I don't have a number in mind for how long people stay for. I mean,
Yeah.
The 90 works for me, I just don't wanna trip over that limit. That's right in the spirit of where I'd like to be with
Yeah, I mean,
And I think it would make sense to
Yeah.
continue.
90 days
and have a
is-
discussion with town council.
I think that's due diligence to check it and make sure.
You still want to have town council take a,
I mean, if people are concerned about somebody coming and staying, I mean, frankly, I don't really have a concern about somebody coming and staying here, even if their goal is to get into our schools. I mean, that to me isn't a horrible scenario. I mean, there are gonna be other ways that people can come here and get into the schools, and I can't imagine staying in a seasonal cottage is gonna be a scam.
yeah,
People
I
are
don't
gonna be
think
running,
that'll
but-
work.
But I think if people are concerned about that, I certainly think we should figure out what the law is from town council before we come up with a number for how long people can stay.
It's reasonable.
I'll go along with that.
So what I'm asking the city solicitor is if the statement that once, what is it, I mean, I'm asking about 90 days in school systems, like once.
Yeah, is there some sort of time frame where if someone is here, say, more than 90 days, does that give them residency and access to the school system or not? Or is there no
does-
law like
if
that?
Well, they're
someone's-
not gonna
if someone's
stay
here for
more than
14
90
days.
days. They're only gonna stay 90 days.
Would they be eligible for schools?
Or, yeah.
Within that 90-day
What's the trigger
period.
for eligibility?
Or is there even one?
Could be, 14 days, somebody's here, who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know, but it may not be the city solicitor that may be the person who can answer
Yeah.
that question best. It might be the schools council.
Superintendent?
Well, the schools,
I can
the
start
lawyer
with-
for the schools.
I can start with
Or
Nancy and
Superintendent,
then,
probably, no?
Superintendent may
Yeah,
have a good
superintendent.
handle
I mean, I know
on
when
that. And
people-
I think for planning purposes, for the schools, it's really important to know how
Yeah.
many students.
But
you
we're
have.
talking just within that 90-day period, not over that, so.
so I'll start with the superintendent first and see what her response is.
Great.
And then follow up with the city solicitor if needed. Okay.
I have a question.
Yep.
If there is if there isn't a seasonal cottage and it's 90 days, are there any requirements for heating in cabins during winter months?
A lot of snow going.
That's a good question.
I didn't
naturally
see.
So we're going, addressing the state building code here,
Yeah.
Yeah,
the state sanitary codes.
I didn't see any.
You have to have an expert in the room, I think, about sanitary.
We didn't put anything down for winter heating requirements.
Section 10.03, I think it's 3.4, but we added, I crossed out, oh no, it's section 4, excuse me.
Section 4?
Yeah, it says each unit will have interior sanitary facilities and kitchen facilities and meet the requirements of the Massachusetts State Building Code.
So
Not entirely,
that
I
should
think
take care of
The health agent
That
is in
should
the
take
room,
care
if you
of
need to
the
bring her to the podium.
heating. Oh,
The health agent
Yeah,
know
yeah,
about
so-
building code?
She is here.
Not building codes, but certainly the sanitary codes.
There may be codes under the health that regards to
That would
heating that she
require
might be
heating.
able to answer.
Probably the ability to keep the units between up to 68 degrees in the wintertime.
yeah.
64 at night may be a requirement that's in the state code but I'm
Yeah.
happy to invite
Yeah.
Jackie to
What's
answer
that?
question if folks want.
Jackie, can you answer a
Can you
question
hear
for
us?
Just have her
Barely.
come to the podium. Can you come to the podium? Sure. Thank you.
Thank you for your letter, by the way.
You're welcome. I have more to say when public speak time is available. I'm Jackie Duda. I'm your health agent here in the city for those who don't know me already. And hello.
Hi. So the question was about heating in the winter. Is there anything under your codes that would require there to be a certain temperature to be maintained?
There are, in fact, there are a number of requirements in the housing code. It's quite extensive. It covers everything from the number of plugs in the wall to, it's very extensive. So I would say if you point to the state sanitary code for housing in your code, it'll cover everything. And you won't have to reinvent the wheel.
Okay.
So in section 10.03(4),
Yep. All right.
and when we say state building code, we could refer to the state sanitary code as well.
I had it as
That's-
10.033. Must meet
It is
requirements
3.
of the building
Oh,
code.
3, I'm sorry.
And I was gonna recommend it.
Oh, I'm sorry,
You
it
also
is
add the
4.
state sanitary code for housing in
It
there.
is.
Yeah, we have 334.
Yeah, 334.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure I get that right. Right now, I'm going to read again what we have. Please let me know if it should be adjusted in half. Each unit will have interior sanitary facilities and kitchen facilities and meet the requirements of the Massachusetts State Building Code. Is that
Well,
one?
the Massachusetts State Building Code is a mass general law that is enforced by building commissioners and inspectors in cities. There are, separate from that, a whole gamut of public health laws. And those are enforced by boards of health or health departments and health agents like myself. I'm an agent of the Board of Health. The State Sanitary Code for Housing is the code that applies here.
For heat.
For heat, for light requirements, for the amount of window space you have, for the amount of square feet in a bedroom, for trash removal, for all kinds of things.
So we have at the end of that Massachusetts State Building Code, and
Yeah.
you're saying Massachusetts State Building Code for housing.
No.
And
No,
state
I'm saying-
sanitary
I'm
code for
saying
housing.
I'm just being
Massachusetts
specific.
State Building Code
And.
And
780, comma, and the State Sanitary Code for Housing as enforced by the Board of Health, or something like that. I mean,
So-
I could work with Jessica to tweak it so that it's the actual regulation.
excellent. Thank you, Jackie.
Any other
Okay,
questions?
I don't at the moment.
that
Good
helps.
for now.
Okay, will
You
there
wanna-
be
while
public
you're up
speak
here?
time?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not yet, but yeah, we will have it. Or are we done?
While she's here, see what she has to say.
Yeah.
I guess,
Other comments?
While you're,
yeah, while you're here.
Yeah, sure.
alright. So, first I want to reiterate what I also said in the email, and that is that by mass general law, what is being proposed as defined in the seasonal cottage regulation is actually a motel. Motels are licensed by boards of health in Massachusetts, again by mass general law, and we also would inspect them, and we would apply the state sanitary code for housing in any inspection and in licensing. So any cottage, any structure people are living in has to meet this code, or be permitted as temporary housing by the Board of Health. So that would be a trailer in the event of somebody living in a trailer after a fire at their house. You know, sometimes they pull up a trailer and the insurance company plants you in the trailer while they're working on your house. That's temporary housing. Trailers at fairs and carnivals are also temporary housing. So, except for that, everything has to meet has to meet the state sanitary code for housing. So, now, when reading your regulation, the first thing that struck me is, I'm gonna call it a motel. You're gonna call it a seasonal cottage community, but you know, if it acts like a duck and it walks like a duck and it talks like a duck, it's a duck, it's a motel. So if we call it a motel, then the owner of this establishment will have at their disposal the regulations that apply to motel owners that first require it to collect state taxes, occupancy taxes, but also give them an array of regulations that allow them to remove nuisance people without having to go through a whole eviction procedure, which will allow them to remove people for non-payment, which kind of puts to rest for me the concern that seasonal cottages could end up being long-term housing for people that aren't paying rent and become nuisances. And I think that's what some of the larger community is concerned about. But if it's a motel, and it's called a motel by the city, and we treat it as a motel, then that owner would have at their disposal, in my reading of the Mass General laws that apply to hotels.
then,
So they would be able to make reservations and send people out the door if they haven't paid the bill after 2 days and so forth and so on.
Which, to be clear, we already do allow.
I was gonna
under
say-
the zoning.
do,
Motels
Motel.
is an allowable use
Great.
under the zoning.
oh, okay, so should we consider this rather than seasonal cottages to be considered motels?
Well, my second
Seasonal
comment was, why are we
motels?
calling it seasonal?
Or
Because if you call it
just
seasonal.
consider it motels, eliminate
Well,
seasonal?
that's up to you as a committee to decide, but these are just my comments and my thoughts. If you call it a seasonal establishment, then you have to make seasonal rules. Well, the city's gonna grow and change, you know, and you may not wanna live with that. And further, who's gonna enforce that? Who's gonna be running around, looking into doors and windows, trying to figure out if somebody's exceeding some seasonal rule we made? If we don't need a seasonal rule, why make it? If I'm a motel owner and I've just spent much money building 3 or 4 cottages in a 5-acre plot, you can bet I'm gonna close down if it's not profitable. And I'm gonna stay open if it is. And if it is, it means that we're serving people that need rooms on a temporary basis. That's the key.
All right.
Well, I think one of the reasons for the seasonal part was to actually limit the length of the stay, because I think under the regular motel regulations, there isn't a limit on how long, correct? So
I
you
don't
can
know if there
come.
is or not, but you're limited by what you can afford.
Right.
Right, I know, but I do think that as we started this process, and I think members of the community are concerned that it turns into basically an apartment. If you have someone who's gonna come into what we would call seasonal cottage, but now call a motel, and there's no limit on how long they can stay, then it removes our ability with the seasonal cottage. Isn't that it's only useful during a season, but more that a person is coming for a season, that they're not staying for a long period of time. So I think at least when we started this process, that was kind of the goal of crafting the seasonal cottage, was to be able to regulate the length of the stay, which I think we anticipated would be a concern for some people, and I think has played out that way.
Well, nothing limits the length of a stay, like your pocketbook. But if you're in a tenant-landlord relationship and you don't pay your rent, it's months and months and months and many housing court appearances and a lot of lawyer fees before the landlord really can evict that tenant in many circumstances. If you're a motel, you have a different legal designation. And again, you do want to check this with city council, because this is just my reading of the Mass General laws. But as a motel, you don't have to go through all that. You have the right to evict me the day after I don't pay my bill. So that ends a lot of that problem, as I see it.
Plus, I think if you have a motel, your rates are a little higher, that who would want to stay at a place that has a little higher rate year-round?
I'm not sure if the rates will change whether you're calling it a seasonal cottage or a motel.
Whenever set the rate, wherever they want to set it, really.
Well, yeah, whatever they perceive as a rate. I don't know if there's a set rate for motel.
And I think that's market forces at work there.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
So, well,
And then my final comment is that in section 10.05, 2, certification of sanitary facilities. I'm not sure what sanitary facilities means, and I'm not sure who certifies those. Are you referring to, when you refer to the certificate of occupancy, are you referring to the certificate of occupancy that the building commissioner gives a structure after it's passed a final inspection after construction?
Yeah.
yeah.
And if you decide to keep this seasonal, I would recommend that in the definition section, you have to define what seasonal means. The definitions are key to any good regulation. You know, if you don't define things in that first section of a regulation, then all those paragraphs after that where you use this term and that term and you assume people know what that means, that doesn't really have strength. If you end up in any kind of a legal process, if you haven't defined what those things mean in the beginning. That's been my experience with mass regulations anyway for public health.
We have 2 definitions there currently, seasonal cottage community and seasonal cottage. And you're saying you'd like to see just the word what seasonal indicates.
Well, I'm just recommending you define what seasonal means, because you use the term seasonal throughout the regulation, but you don't you don't know, say what that is exactly.
Yeah, because it does
Is
say,
it winter season, summer season, no season?
it says seasonal use and not as a year-round dwelling, that's the only.
Right, so
definition.
we know what year-round means, that's a given.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can dispute that, but what does seasonal mean?
Well, I think that's the part in 10.022 that we're talking about, is defining what that limitation on the length of use would be, right? And so that's
Limited stay.
been all over and
If
to
you
be
limit
determined.
seasonal, that ends a lot of the.
Yeah.
I think also, to refresh the board's memory, there was, part of it was also to make sure that this didn't end up being a subdivision.
Right.
That,
Yes.
that it didn't end up becoming, a tiny home subdivision.
Well, yeah.
And trying to create some limitations and using the seasonal as the way to limit it, or to prevent it from becoming a mini subdivision without an approved road and going through the subdivision process.
Yeah, now I can see where your concern is there, yeah. Although personally, I'm a big fan of tiny homes. You know, if they're done right, and not the ones on trailers, but just
Right.
small homes.
Right.
All right, anything else?
Nothing else from me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Becky.
Appreciate your work on this.
Any other questions, comments, or are we ready to open this up?
We already asked.
Okay, so I just want to encourage people, because we've got minutes from the last meeting, we've got recordings, so to the extent there's sort of new information, new comments, that would be great, but we do have a lot of stuff on our agenda, and so trying not to be too repetitive with what we did last time would be greatly appreciated.
It's gonna be a long.
So is there anybody who would like to speak on this matter? Come on up.
Shoot, we got one.
Just ask that you state your name and your address for the record before you speak. Thank you.
First of all, is it legal that I'm not from here to actually speak
Totally.
on this? Okay,
Sure.
so my name is William.
Democracy. It's democracy in action.
Don't want to get run out.
No, not at all.
My name is William Pagliashef, and I'm from your sister community, East Hampton in Connecticut, with a space between the words. The reason I decided to come up here and speak about it, I heard about it, and I want to tell you that I spend about 90 to 100 days a year here for a variety of reasons. One of them is recreation, listening to summer music. The other is working here. I have a large community that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years since my youngest son started going to North Star. He was staying here in East Hampton with a friend and would bike trail through there. So there's a variety of reasons why it's really awesome to have a place to be able to stay. Now when I come here to work or play, I have to go home. I have to drive an hour and 20 minutes to go home, even though I would much prefer on certain nights after hard days construction work to actually stay here and not have to drive that hour and 20 through Hartford rush hour traffic on the way back. It's really inconvenient and uncomfortable for me. So I'm advocating that the
Planning board?
Bylaw.
Bylaw?
the bylaw, thank you.
Ordinance?
Or ordinance be adopted for those reasons. I want to tell you a few things also about me since I've been doing this for the last 4 or 5 years. I have a bank account at ESB. I shop at Big E's. I've got a customer card. It's like this is my surrogate community. I've actually become part of the community. I can list the number of restaurants that I patronize. Did I mention Mount Tom ice cream yet? I'm in my beard from this afternoon. I stop there almost every time I'm here, and it's starting to show, unfortunately, so we might want to talk about that one. But the number of restaurants and businesses that I facilitate, that I use to facilitate my comfortability in being in this environment would even increase if I were allowed to stay here. You know, like tonight I'm staying here to go to dinner afterwards. I would love to have that opportunity to stay longer, to spend more money. I don't believe that my visiting here actually costs this town anything. If anything, it may increase the income based on occupancy taxes, you know. I would love to have a private place to stay. Right now, currently, if I do stay, I get to stay at a friend's house. I bring my wife and we're in somebody else's place. It's not necessarily the most comfortable thing. It's fine for a temporary stay, but if I were having a week job here, I'd rather have my own place to shower, to bathe, to be with my wife, and so forth. So from that angle, I think that the cost of my being here to the community is nil. If there's some, you know, I rent short-term places in both Connecticut and I rent out as a landlord, I guess. I don't know that that's the right name, but I rent out places in Connecticut and in North Carolina. And for the last 4 years, I've not had one one reason for any town official to be at my place. You know, no fire, no police, no nothing. The fire department did come once to make sure that I was in compliance, you know, but that's a good thing for everybody, you know, not, I didn't see it as a hindrance, you know, make sure we had fire extinguishers, windows, access and stuff. So I'm advocating for this legislation, registration, whatever the heck it is, ordinance to be adopted so that I can increase the amount of time that I stay here. And maybe if I could actually afford or get to bid on a house, I could move up here at some point. I really can't figure out that process yet either. We can address that next time. Thank you very kindly. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Anybody else?
My name is David Pogue, 134 West Street. I've worked the construction trade for over 40 years. For the last 10 years, I've been a traveler, like that gentleman. I stay at temporary suites, hotels, extended stay, long-term. And I'll tell you, I would not want to be a neighbor of one of these places, because you get a bunch of construction workers who might want to stay like 6 weeks. I go to Immokalee, Florida, you know, for 2-3 weeks at a time. I go to Tampa. We stay in a hotel with a bunch of other travelers. It's not pretty. You work maybe from 2 in the afternoon till 2 in the morning. You want to come home and have some beers. You're not being quiet. It's a nuisance to the neighborhood. That's why usually these places are segregated. But in this, what you handed out, you're going to make all these buildings conform to the Massachusetts Building Code, right?
Correct.
That means that, I don't know what if you're looking at a building on slab, on pylons, with grade beams, but you won't be able to throw up a shotgun house. You know, don't look back construction. You're going to have to build these, you're going to have to go in there, you're going to have airflow. Your insulation is going to be such that you don't lose so much heat. If you're going to apply the code, if you're going to put it on pylons and the ground, you're going to have to use all pressure treated. Now the former town inspector, I had a crawl space, and he was demanding me to do that. And I was framing 400 square feet for a kitchen and a living room that had to be level, laser level. You can't do that using pressure treated lumber, which is the code's gonna require unless you put 4 mil plastic down. So it doesn't make sense if you have it open on pylons, and I don't, the way this thing is written, there's no detail. There's no detail at all. You say in one sentence you're gonna conform to the Mass Building Code on all the buildings. Well, Mass also has requirements for if you have an off-road lot, you have to have a certain width on that road. What's been discussed here before is, yeah, we're just gonna make it wide enough for the fire trucks to come, and then you go circular and turn around. I don't know if that's gonna meet code. You guys are opening up a Pandora's box here, because it doesn't seem to be very well thought out. You've got a minimum of 5 acres. Now, I have been to an ordinance meeting, right? Where there was a set of plans brought out for 12 buildings. Okay? And everybody said you can't talk about one specific thing, but I am one of the 48 people that owns over 5 acres, right? And I've traveled around town handing out flyers trying to alert people what's going on here. Nobody's heard about it. And I'm losing my train of thought. 5 acres, think about 5 acres. That's less, you said before we couldn't talk about a certain site, but I'm telling you, what I've seen in a different committee had 12 buildings on 5 acres. That's less than a half an acre a lot. That's almost what you see in the old real crowded, like in New City. There's not much room for 12 buildings. Then you're gonna add 25-foot buffers along all property lines, and then you're gonna add parking, and then you got the footprint of the buildings themselves, and then it's gotta be 30% open. Do you realize how dense that is? And you're talking 3 months for a stay? One of your arguments here was that the parents of Williston kids don't want to stay in Northampton or in Holyoke, so we got to have, let's have a place for them to stay, number one. That's a ridiculous notion, okay? And they're going to stay for 3 months? Who benefits from this 3-month stay? Nobody but the landowner. And you're going to get this density. Think about it. Think about how big your house lots are. Unless you got a 1 acre, I'm going to be from here to that screen with somebody with a new neighbor for 3 months, maybe every 3 months. Maybe you'll vote in 6 months because you haven't put any time limit, uninterrupted stay in here. I think what you're trying to do is create a supply where there is no demand. I think what you're doing is that one person came in with a plan because they screwed up on buying some land, and now they have to make it profitable, and you're going to throw it in a residential neighborhood. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves, because it's not in it's not in your neighborhood. And you hand out a little thing. Well, I got this printed and it shows everything. You guys realize that down by the, where was that? What's the name of that place? The Treehouse community? You realize one of these could go in there? And those are all elderly people. I don't think that you have thought this through. You got one person driving this. And I know personally, because that person had come and talked to me when she found out that her investor came out and saw what she had and said, you gotta make this pay. 5, 8, and oh yeah, just that one person driving this, how much land do they own? Just a smidge over 5 acres. You gotta have at least 20 acres for something like this. And I wouldn't even agree to it with that. Like I said, I'm a traveler. I don't want people like me or the guys I associate with because I have weird hours. I sometimes work 24 hours a day. And I'll come in at 4 o'clock and I'm so beat, I'm slamming my doors. I'm sure I'm waking people up. And I do not want people I did not invest in a residential neighborhood to have a bunch of transients come in and they're going to interrupt my privacy. So I don't know what you guys think you're doing, but
Can I ask you a question though? Because it seems
you
like
have to speak up.
okay, it seems like a lot of your concerns have to do with sort of the length of the stay, that people are going to be using it as sort of like transient
It's
temp.
not just, if you're calling it seasonal, where is the demand? Anybody see, I know, you guys said that you picked this from other towns. You never told us what towns you picked it up.
But can I ask you a question though? Because I'm curious if there's a length of the time where you would be comfortable with something like this.
Pardon me?
If the 90 days is too long, I get what you're saying, that you think this is going to lead to sort of temporary housing. But is there a period of time where you do think that that's not going to sort of lend itself to this long-term
Look,
housing?
if you're going to write this and you're going to increase the acreage, the density, I told you, you threw out all the zoning. You just waved your magic wand and zoning does not now exist. The frontage, that's how you control density. You made that disappear. You're going to get it too dense. And yeah, if you're going to do this on a 100-acre park, or somebody wants a campground, 2 weeks maximum stay, that's it. That's what you guys are saying though, we need this, right? Who's gonna stay there for 3 months? An occasional guy like me, or like the other gentleman, but previously, the land that is, the person who owns the land that's driving this touchstone, they could have a campground run by a nonprofit. Why do you think the people that came before you put that in the zoning? A nonprofit. There's a reason, that's a safety valve. That's so you don't get somebody to commercialize in a area. God, I don't know.
Okay.
All right,
But I'll
thank you.
tell you what, now, let me ask you a question. You guys vote and
If you're
then it
gonna-
goes
if
to
you're
the
gonna-
city council? Well, I can't hear any response, so. Because we got a nice sound system that doesn't work. After you guys vote, if you vote to proceed with this, does it go to city council for another vote?
Yes.
Okay. I think y'all really ought to look inward because the people that came before you set that up, that camping, and now, like I said, you're creating a supply and there's not a demand.
We understand.
All right.
And
Thank
you're
you.
gonna favor one landowner in this town, and you're gonna affect a couple of thousand of butters and people in the neighborhood.
Okay.
Thank
If
you.
you pass it, you ought to be ashamed of yourselves.
Thank you. Is there anybody else? Yes, sir.
My name's Taylor Roberge. I live at on Chapman Avenue, and I was going to want to come up and voice my support for the change of bylaws. I am a recent transplant here from Birmingham, Alabama, so relatively new to the area, which I love. It's a really cool place. I love the city, and kind of me being here was a little bit tricky as far as finding a location to be and rent ultimately. And that's because there really wasn't anywhere to stay around here. And I know a lot of other people that my wife works with who are also coming to this area as new residents at Bay State. A lot of them are dispersed throughout the city, but some of the difficulty in finding where your location that you ultimately want to stay in kind of comes down to, you know, where you might end up in a hotel and stay that week when you're looking for apartments. And fortunately for us, we ended up being in East Hampton through some happenstance. And really loving the place and able to find an apartment here. And so I think that having lodging opportunities here can really benefit the community in bringing in new young professionals and new individuals into the city and buying houses. And ultimately, my wife and I have sort of been talking about it, but potentially we're going to end up wanting to stay here too. And so we really like the community, and we really wish that there was a way for other people to enjoy this community and ultimately potentially live here as well. And it's difficult to kind of get that feel unless you have somewhere in here, you know, in East Hampton to stay at, where you can walk down the road and do things like that. So, but yeah, so I just wanted to voice my support for this.
Do you mind if I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
I'm just curious how long it took you to find an apartment.
We did a lot of internet searching, and we came up for about a week, basically.
Okay.
So we were here for about a week, and then went back home, and then were able to kind of get things figured out once we left after we kind of came in and looked at different apartments throughout different areas. So yeah, that's about how long we stayed.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thank
Welcome
you.
to East Hampton.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Sure.
There's three of us. Hi. Cindy Cassell. I am in Williamsburg right now, Hyde Hill Road. I have a couple of apartments in East Hampton that I own, pay taxes on, and used to live in. When my kids were born, I lived on Chapman Avenue, and we lived there for about 10 years. But my family's from Wisconsin, and whenever they would come out to visit, they never had anywhere to stay. So we'd have to try and find places for them to stay, often like Holyoke or Northampton. And we've had many visitors stay at the Grand Hotel in Northampton or other places and spend their money there. We'd go to brunch there. We would wind up leaving town. So I just want to voice my support for places to stay, I think it's a bold assumption to think that all the people who will stay there will be beer drinking, ruckus causing folks who are here to cause problems. I think a lot of people in this town just want a nice place to stay and want to spend their money in town. And it's a great.
Whoa.
But I mean, it's a great place, and it's sad that there's nowhere nice or decent to put a family to stay, because people just wind up leaving and spending their money somewhere else. So I would support the proposition, or whatever we're calling it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Dr. Colleen Chambers. I live over on Clark Lane in East Hampton, and I'm a recent addition to East Hampton. Also from East Hampton, Connecticut. So my concern is, I know that a couple of the areas that had been proposed were areas that I would consider deeply residential, meaning if you were to have seasonal cottages there aren't large roads, they have tons of potholes, and they're already difficult to navigate with just a few people that live on those roads. My concern would be adding that kind of traffic, adding that kind of component. You would have to redo all of that. I'm not sure, as a new homeowner, I don't have, a lot of money to give towards increased taxes. I'm trying to pay down a house. My concern would be that, given that extra strain on the neighborhood, losing that small town feel, I mean, that's why we moved to East Hampton in the first place. I'm not against having places to stay. As a resident myself, in Virginia, I had to do that on the fly, kind of book a place online and decide to live there. But that being said, I think that the areas that are proposed there are better options and need kind of those wider zones. My fear would be really losing all of that small town feel, because East Hampton, Connecticut used to be like East Hampton, Massachusetts, and has totally lost that small town feel. I think that would drive out a lot of the young professionals that have moved there to start their families, because it's going to become more and more like Northampton, which I think we're different enough from to keep it in a smaller zone. So my fear would be just kind of starting that, I guess, domino effect, for lack of a better word.
So ask you a question, is there some sort of alternative for maybe lot size that you're thinking of there to keep it out of the, or is it a?
I think my concern would be both location and lot size. I think a lot of the roads, at least towards my end of town, are already, they've been patched over so many times, they could have been paved right one time and solved the issue. I think if we get to a zone where we're going through all those tiny little back roads, they don't have a lot of clearance, there's not good areas to turn, people walk, strollers and kids on the roads. I would be really concerned without a sidewalk system, and then you'd have to widen everything. I think if you were to make the lot size bigger, then you could potentially get rid of the concern of overpopulating those areas. Then you'd also have to look at widening roads and adding sidewalks.
Because a lot of those properties are further out, so then you're in smaller roads.
Right, which would be my main concern, are the ones that are really farther out.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Jessica, I have a clarification question. These properties that are 5 acres, as of now, what is the size of subdivisions that could be put into these? Like if we're looking at impact, like for example, if we said that someone could have 6 cottages on a 5-acre plot, or they could do a 6-house subdivision, is that?
Well, so
are we looking at apples to apples here?
There's 2 different types of subdivisions. So there's the conventional subdivision, which would have to be based on the dimensional standards for that lot and zone, where it would have very specific frontage requirements and very specific lot sizes.
Okay.
We have in our zoning the open space residential development, which most of the subdivisions that have been built in East Hampton in the recent years have followed that track.
Okay.
The majority, yeah. I can't think of one in recent times that has not been an open space residential development, which means that there is a required open space set aside, And as a result, you're still allowed the same number of units, but they're built on smaller lots with reduced frontage.
Okay.
So the number of units doesn't change, it's just that the dimensional standards are allowed to be shrunk down. And in a more compact area, so that a portion of the land can be protected.
So let me test your skills here. On a 5 acre
I'm
lot.
gonna say, because we already went through this with JP last meeting.
Okay.
It's gonna depend on the site.
It's gonna depend on the lot.
It's gonna depend on wetlands, it's gonna
Right.
depend on soils, it's gonna depend on slope, it's gonna depend on, I mean, there are so many factors that
Sure.
a developer has to take into consideration. If you wanna just do the basic geometry, you'll get a number that is a number, but is not based in reality because
because it's
you
not
have
buildable.
stormwater standards that you have to abide by, you have impervious surface that you need to calculate. There's so much stuff that goes into coming up with a development proposal.
So maybe we can get a little bit more theoretical and say, if we had an open space development that you had just
Paul Street Extension,
Paul Street, and
Okay,
so,
so
but
that's-
if we imagine that, and
that's
then
8 units.
and then we imagine what a potential
Is that right?
you know cottage community could look like, do we think that there would be similar impact? Because we're talking about, you know, I think it was just mentioned, we might have to widen roads and build sidewalks and pave roads. But if I mean,
Municipality doesn't, what is usually built under a subdivision is the subdivision road.
Right.
The municipality is in,
That's
and
what- I
we
guess
don't
that's what I'm trying to
have-
get to.
And we don't have mitigation in the state of Massachusetts that allows us to force a developer's hand. It's a very delicate
so if this
legal
didn't pass,
negotiation.
then a subdivision could go in there that would have similar or greater impact.
There was already a subdivision planned for the parcel that everybody keeps talking about.
Right.
Right.
Okay. And it
And
would,
which had a subdivision road. And granted, it was a bigger piece of parcel. That parcel has been split in half since then. But, you know, anybody, theoretically, if you can make the numbers work, you could put in a subdivision on a large piece of land.
Right.
You could also put in a 40B development. And then you don't have to abide, or affordable housing project, and there's zoning waivers that happen under that process. Not to throw the scary 40B flag, but I'm just saying, in reality, that could happen. So, and we already allow motels, we already allow campgrounds. Those are already in here.
Right.
I think the idea in the initial, and this has evolved a lot over the process, and this is why process is great, and this is why it's great to have people in the room, because this is how we get to a consensus, and it's really important that everybody's here and is part of that conversation. Right. So, you know, the initial idea was that we don't have a market for a big hotel chain. We allow it in the zoning. I've tried to recruit. They don't want to invest in a community like us because we're too far off the beaten path. We don't have direct highway access.
Right.
We're not going to have a hotel from an economic market perspective that wants to come to East Hampton. So looking at other ways, and maybe this isn't the solution, but I think in the spirit, as how you said earlier, I think it's important, and I think there's an acknowledgement that there is a need for some type of temporary lodging. That's needed in East Hampton. Maybe or maybe not, this isn't the right way to go. But there is a need, and there are people who are coming to this meeting saying there is a need. So I think it's a matter of us figuring out what is the right solution to that market condition right now in East Hampton. We're not going to get a hotel. We don't have hotel access. We have people coming to the community. They don't want to go to Northampton, and they don't want to go to Holyoke and spend their money in another community for restaurants and brunch and whatnot. They want to spend their money here. How can we make that happen? You know, maybe we have to toss this out and rethink this. But I think there is a situation here that can get amended through zoning. We just need to come up with the right way to do it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I totally agree.
I think in some ways we're on the right path. We're going the right way. As Jess said, we need some way to help people come into East Hampton, and that's to get them lodging. You know, we just don't have the places to put these people. And as she mentioned, no hotel wants to come into East Hampton.
So, when I...
Quick question.
Go ahead.
I have
That's fine, go ahead.
We have an accessory apartment
We do.
standard that was passed?
A couple
how
years
many-
ago.
Couple years ago?
Well,
How
we've
many
had
years
it for a
ago?
while, but we amended it recently to allow detached accessory dwellings. Previously, they needed to be attached. And we had a number of people come into the planning office looking to convert an existing garage that was on their property, turn a portion of it into
Livable
a
space.
livable space that they could rent out. You'd have to check with the building and, or actually we could check the ZBA records. We've had some people who have come forth and asked for that,
How
for
many-
sure. We
so
also
I'm
had a bunch of
wondering,
illegals that were already happening.
I just wonder how many people have taken advantage of this, because it sounds like if 10 or 20 people in town decided to have an accessory unit to their principal residence, they're getting older, they need to, some additional income, the retirement income isn't what it used to be. How many have taken advantage? It would seem that that would suit the kind of needs that we're talking about for temporary housing.
Well, I'll tell you,
Well, but there's-
what's happening is Airbnbs, which are unregulated, have the city is not collecting any taxes on them. There's no health enforcement of Airbnbs. And if you go to the Airbnb website, you can see how many units are available for rent in East Hampton, and they're being rented. So, you know, that's a whole other issue and a whole other can of worms that at some point we're gonna need to tackle and deal with, for sure.
But there is a legal process, and that would be to go to the accessory apartments that have
Well,
been.
there's a
could, but-
difference between doing it as a landlord tenant for like a long-term lease versus what we're talking about, which would be like a one-night stay.
Is there a there's no requirement for a long-term lease in our accessory apartments? As I
That's the
as I
intent. The
recall.
intent is
But
that
there-
it's a
but
rent.
A homeowner may not want to get into the business of running a hotel out of the apartment in their garage versus renting it out to somebody long-term. It may not be that that's the tool that is gonna meet the demand, I don't know.
Right. But there is a tool.
There is a way for
I'm just-
accessory
I'm not sure that
apartment.
it's.
It's not the
it's
right
been
tool
used.
for short-term rental. It's the tool for providing a rental unit that's affordable, that might not be hitting the 1,400 price point, which we're seeing for rental units right now. It might be something that you could rent for 600 or 500. So it's for a different, I'd say, niche group of individuals. It's sort of the intent of accessory apartments. They're really to help young folks stay in town, stay with their families if they can't afford to buy a house at that time. It's in-law apartments, but it
Right.
doesn't have to be. You know, I know folks who rent out an accessory apartment to, and people will stay there for years, you know?
So, I have a story. When I was a kid, I lived in New Hampshire with my parents up in the White Mountains. My grandparents lived in Florida, and they would come up every summer for 3 months and stay in this little tiny cottage. And there was like 20 of them in a row, and they were all detached, and it was called a motel. Why couldn't we use the motel language in a similar scenario for this same situation?
So we have no standards for motel at all right now in our zoning.
Okay.
None. We have in the table of uses, we have motel as a use. But you would, as a board, if a motel came before the board for review, you would just follow the standard special permit procedure. There's no additional regulations that would be for a motel. So somebody could theoretically have a motel proposal on the table
With detached buildings.
with detached buildings, and there would be no limit.
They wouldn't have to follow any of these.
Right,
We
and
don't
these
have to
things
follow
were literally
any of
like
this.
this close to each other. I mean, so yeah, there was no limited.
So right now, they could do detached buildings with none of the regulations that we've been talking about as far as like setbacks or buffers.
Or building
Or length of stay. I
Or
mean, that
length
was
of
why we
stay.
originally went with the
Right.
seasonal cottage, was that gave us the tool to sort of say you can stay for X number of days in a given period.
Right.
And the motel wouldn't have any cap on that,
Yeah,
so if
as
someone
long
wants
as they
to come
wanted
and
to pay.
pay, they can stay.
Yep. Right.
So I think that was sort of the initial reason why we went with the seasonal cottage sort of concept.
So if we put this at 90 days and added the health standards
And building code
the
standards.
building
yeah.
code standard, I mean, that would be a significant increase to what someone could do right now
Right.
What do you mean a significant increase to what they could
of
do now?
regulation. Significant increase of regulation of, the control of the board over a
You mean as,
potential project.
okay, so the difference is the zone. So the motels,
Motels are allowed in highway business, neighborhood
Right.
business, and in the general business districts because they're
there is no,
businesses.
but there's no general business
But
zoning,
that's-
zone. That's a
That's
still in
That's
there.
an error
what it
from
says still in
1995.
It's still in there.
That's still in there.
Yeah.
a continuing error.
Right,
We'll get to
so,
that.
yeah.
So yeah, I guess the
Yeah, so the
expansion
zone.
would be to move from the business zone to a residential zone for business
that's-
activity.
Right.
And I have a problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, for all intents and purposes, this a seasonal cottage community, to me, is a business. I mean, that's it's just.
Well, if you're making money, then it is.
Yeah, it's no different than a bed and breakfast, which is a
Right.
business.
Which can happen in residential zones.
Right.
So, bed and breakfasts are allowed, hold on, please hold.
Bed and breakfasts are allowed by
JP's got
special
it.
permit, R5, R10, basically
Everywhere.
all the zones except for highway business.
Business, right.
That's
So it's
interesting.
the opposite.
Except for highway business, it can't have a
So you can have a bed and breakfast
in a
in-
highway business zone.
In pretty much any district except for our highway business and industrial.
Right.
Well, it's also not dissimilar from a regular apartment building either, because there's no requirement for how long you have a lease in a regular apartment building, and it's the same sort of density and issues with that. It's
Right.
just that it's one structure instead of separate, smaller
And the
structures.
bed and breakfast is limited to, the rooming units must share a common entrance for the single-family dwelling. It must be a single-family dwelling.
And if you go to E, read E.
E says transient occupants prohibited from staying more than 30 days in any 1 year, in a 1 year period for bed and breakfast. But the concept of bed and breakfast, I mean, you can only get buildings that are so big and you can only have so many
We only have
rooms.
one in town.
We have one in town,
We
right?
used to have two, now we only have one.
So I think the intent usage is much smaller in a B&B than in this
And
seasonal
how do we
cottage
enforce this 30-day
motel.
thing for a bed and breakfast?
Well, that's sort of my same question on the 90-day. Who's
Yeah.
gonna be
Well,
the
there are-
enforcement authority at the city level to make sure that somebody, and how is that proved?
Well, there are record-keeping obligations, right?
I would think.
This is hard.
It is hard.
I think we have a need. And I think really what we're coming down to, we talked about the time, but now the issue really is the effect on residential. We heard some pretty strong arguments, both in favor of having it and worrisome about the impact on residential communities. What if we focus on that and tweaking it? What if we put some further limitations as security on the number that can go in to these places, the density? Now, I have to admit that I'm not completely on board with a lot of what's been said in terms of that it's overdense, and I think these are alarmist, reactionary, and fighting for a cause that I'm not on the side of. But I do think that we have to consider strongly if there is impact and take a look at it. I just don't happen to agree that the density that's been stated is the reality of the situation. So right now, we don't know. We can't, as you said, limit how many places we're going to have. It depends on the property. It depends on the space.
And it will depend on market conditions.
But
You know,
but we could perhaps
eventually the
build
market
in
saturates itself out.
Stronger larger setbacks. Stronger limitations of density to secure against this, and still do this while providing greater limitations to respect residential communities.
I think that's fair.
My name is Kathleen Havler, and
Hold on one second. Hold on. Are we, any comments on what Jim just said?
I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable.
Yeah. I think it could be done. We just have to find a way to put a package together that we can all agree to that might be feasible.
Well, I'm wondering
And
too.
work. Never mind feasible, work.
I'm wondering if there might be a way to put language in too about sort of annual certification as far as the length of stay and that kind of thing, where you sort of put the onus on the property owner to report to the city
Right.
and verify that there haven't been people there that have extended beyond that. I'm not sure what form that would take, but that might provide some sort of reporting requirement.
One thing that stood out to me that Jackie said as a big red flag was about the limitations of the property owners to handle the eviction process and how
If
the
they
motel.
keep it as a motel.
Right, but we're not. We're creating this new thing. So that for me is worrisome because it seems obvious that the person running it needs to have the ability to treat it as a motel.
And they will. I mean, I think, often what happens is define something as one way, the zoning code defines something as something else.
Overlap.
But we all figure out where something fits under the codes that we administer.
Right.
So, you know, we may call it one thing because of the landscaping design, the site design, the impacts from the sort of, the character of it. She's not gonna, if she doesn't have a category that fits in, she's gonna fit into the category that makes the most sense for her. And whoever is going to be doing this has to meet those standards. There's gonna have to meet the standards that the health agent believes that they fall under. They will have to meet the standards that are required under the building code, and they will need to meet the standards under the zoning. Development's hard. You have a lot of standards that you have to hit, and you have to get approved under all these different jurisdictions. It's not easy. So it takes a lot of time for somebody to make sure they have an architect that's making sure that they're hitting all the building codes the right way, working with the health agent to make sure that whatever site design they're doing is going to meet all of those codes, and then making sure that whatever is being presented before the planning board is going to hit all the standards that we're requiring as well.
Yeah.
There's 3 different or more codes that they have to take into consideration when designing. Never mind when things get tweaked and changes. And so, you know, I think you understand that just because Jackie calls it a motel under her code doesn't mean we have to call it, we don't have to call it. I mean, if the board
And
wants to
really
go
was
in
my
that
question.
direction.
If we use different language, are we limiting her ability? And if someone's
don't think
gonna-
so.
If someone's gonna go to court because they wanna stay, and their lawyer says, well, look at the language, this isn't a motel, you don't
Well-
have to treat me as a, are we creating?
So I'll say from the eviction standpoint, this is gonna fall into a gray area that has a million other things in it, like dorms, long-term hotels, short-term
Right.
apartments, Airbnb. And it happens all the time, every day in Massachusetts, where someone's in court dealing with what this falls under, and a judge will decide based on what it is. I mean, you're not gonna be able to remove it from a gray area because we want to. I mean, it's just gonna fall in that area. It's gonna be subject to debate.
It's good to have a lawyer on the
Unofficially. Okay, yes.
Okay, Kathleen Havler, I live at 126 West Street. Listening to the ripple effects of all of this, would it be out of the question to put this to the town as a voting question? It has the dynamics to change any neighborhood that you want to do something like this with, or put it into a neighborhood. There's only a handful of people here. I don't know how many other people in East Hampton even realize that this sort of issue is being discussed. It is a major issue, and yes, we do have a problem because there are not places for people to actually stay. But I think the town deserves to have more information, the whole town, because it consists of a lot of little neighborhoods, and most of these places that are now called R something, or this, or some by numbers, are actual quaint little neighborhoods. East Hampton is a very nice place to live, and I think a lot of people would be offended. I mean, I know this is probably hitting below the belt, but think about your neighborhoods. If this were being considered in any of your neighborhoods, how would you feel? There is a need, but I think the town, the whole town, needs to know, because this is a big issue, and it can have a lot of, it can solve a problem if we find a way. Also, if you make it more open to the town, there may be ideas out there. There, like I said, there's only a few people here, but a lot of people in East Hampton who may have other ideas, and also who may want to say, I didn't come to East Hampton to be imposed upon with this sort of a setting right next door to me, or...
So I just want to comment on the participation part, because we've had this on our public agenda of the planning board for probably a year. We've had a couple of these hearings now. There's been articles in the paper. I mean, this is probably the most, I mean, we couldn't publicize this any more than we do, short of going door to door for everyone in the town. I mean, this is sort of as loudly as we can scream that this is a big issue for people to come and participate. And this is frankly a huge turnout for a planning board hearing for anything we do. And I can't imagine a scenario where we could do anything that would get more people here, other than perhaps when this exact same ordinance, if it passes here, ends up at the city council hearing at some point in the future. So I don't know what else we could do to get more people here. If people have strong feelings about this or great ideas, I think we've done everything we can to reach out. And so at some point, the onus sort of falls on the resident that if this is something you care about and want to participate in, this is the process to participate. So I don't know, I mean, the quick answer is our role here is to either recommend or not recommend the ordinance, and it goes to a city council hearing. It's not to determine whether it goes to a citywide vote. But frankly, just from my own perspective, I don't know what else could be done to help publicize this kind of an issue. And I would love to have the whole town here chiming in on what we could and couldn't do. But there's nothing else we can do to sort of help them get here.
Well, but if we put it to the town, the next time we have a voting issue, put it to the town, put it on a ballot and see what sort of response you get.
That's
There
not our.
may be a lot more.
That's not our discretion. I can't do that.
I don't even know how to get something on the ballot, to be honest. I don't know what the cost is associated with getting something
Certain
on the
number of
ballot.
voters can get together and put
A petition
something
together?
on-
Let's put a few.
on the ballot.
So it's not- it's a percentage of the people that voted last.
It changes a lot of things. I
So-
mean, look at how many
But-
things
I
that
would
you've
say-
all found
I would say
already.
to you, if you want to put it to a vote, I'm putting it on you to figure out, no, seriously, to put it on you to talk to the city clerk about what it takes and how many signatures, and start collecting signatures so that it can get put to a vote, if that's something you feel passionate about. Because that's, I think, how it works. It has to be a
That's how it
petition of
works.
voters, and you need to collect signatures. And so if that's what you think needs to happen, then do it.
That's the avenue.
Then do it.
I
Get
think
a
it's a
certain
fair
number
thing
of-
to the people of East Hampton to be able to have a chance to actually, I mean, that's your chance.
Yeah.
Go to vote.
Well,
and
they have a chance, they have a chance now.
They do.
Yeah.
And they
Right.
need to be here, and you
There
need to
are
rally
people
your
here.
troops and get them here, and say to them,
Right.
this is
I'll talk to
important.
Barbara about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's at least one other gentleman. Yep.
Jackie.
Can I get a quick clarification, because I have to leave in part of this gentleman's
Sure.
time. I just wanted to clarify, it isn't the Board of Health
or Massachusetts Department of Public Health regulations that define what you're describing as a motel. It is the general laws of Massachusetts that define what a motel is. And basically it says, to mean any building or group of buildings which provide sleeping accommodations for transient motorists and which is not licensed as an inn. So basically, almost everything we're talking about is a motel. When it's a motel, then it becomes our responsibility to inspect and license it. And we use the housing code that I referred to earlier as the standard that we license and inspect against.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Jackie.
thank you.
All right, sir. You've been very patient. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bill Corby, I live on West Street. I gave my opinion, I think, and this isn't really a complaint. It is in a way, but it's nothing that when I come into these meetings for like the planning board and all that, I see 10 people who are very stone-faced. The only time you see me smiling is when you talk to each other, or when somebody comes up to vote, wants this in town, then you all smile. So when I come into the meetings, I always feel I get it instantly. It's us against them, or them against us. At no time do I get the feeling that anything we've said previously has had any kind of an impact, whether it's for, against some of the ideas. Doug is very passionate about his, for many, many reasons, I'm sure, and I'm not speaking for him. But I never feel like, did they really understand what I meant? I'd be open and willing to come to anything that you could explain, like, I'm sure there's one or two bike riders here who know what a dirt bike sounds like. It's a high pitch and know anything. There's one across the street. I've tried to catch them to call the police on them. You know, something like that in this kind of a setting. I've never seen any plans for what you're gonna build, which would probably relieve half of our anxiety, you know? I spent thousands, as I said the last time, making my house my permanent home forever and ever. And when I come in here, I feel like, well, are we gonna turn it into the trashy neighborhood? Slowly. I mean, it's like a rotting apple. It starts with one little bang, and then it rots the whole apple. We all know this, you know? So that's my concern, is when I come in here, why do I feel it's us against them, meaning you,
right,
the board? or you're against us.
Can I answer that question?
Sure.
So when it's body language. It's basically how we react. So when someone comes up and smiles and starts talking about their experience, just like even like you did, we didn't get stone faces when you just shared that, because we can relate to you. When someone comes up and starts yelling at us and telling us we should be ashamed, it's really challenging to smile at them. So I mean, really, so what I would love to have heard that gentleman come up and really give constructive feedback. But even when he was asked questions, he didn't answer the question. Okay, I'm just giving an example. So I think the situation is, if we could, we do enjoy this feedback. This is our job as residents of the city, but also as board members, is to hear everyone out and listen. So if we're smiling, it's because the person is smiling at us as well. So because we've heard that before. I've only been on this board a few months, but this is the second time I've heard that. Right. And the other scenario, the way that happened, is with another very contentious issue, that the person was yelling at us, and everyone that was against it was yelling at us. So it's just the way we react. Well, it's nothing personal. We actually haven't made a decision. I actually have no opinion on this seasonal cottage thing yet.
Proposed plan.
So that's my second thing. So there isn't.
There
There are no
I mean, I
plans.
think that's part of the confusion, is that this is a zoning proposal that impacts
The
3
entire
different
city.
zoning districts. She has a proposal in her head that nobody has seen on paper.
Yeah.
Right.
And maybe there have been, well, we haven't seen it, I haven't seen it.
No.
And so if you've seen it and she shared that information with you, good for you. You have us.
I-
But she
you know,
also,
Wait,
yeah.
that was shared at an ordinance subcommittee meeting, the plans. I just wanted to make sure that it's
Okay.
not just hearsay.
Right.
It's
It
planning
just
board.
wasn't shared with us in planning.
Also, she can't.
I was there, it was shared.
She can't have much of a concrete proposal right now because there's no bylaw for her to propose under. So she
Right.
doesn't know if we're going to pass this or what form it will be when we pass it. So you can make a hypothetical idea of what anybody in this town wants to do under a seasonal cottage bylaw. Right now, there isn't one, and there certainly is no concept of what it will contain or what restrictions or what it would look like. So there's no-
Let
Yeah.
me interject here. I think one thing that's important is people oftentimes think about this as being in their backyard, and I'm sensitive to that. And you know what's in my backyard? 8 acres of untouched woods. So when we're thinking about this, guess what I'm thinking about? I'm thinking about my backyard, just like you guys are thinking about your backyard. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find, which is what my responsibility and my job is to find a balance between what makes sense for East Hampton, what makes sense for my personal selfish needs of being a property owner in East Hampton with 8 acres of woods in his backyard, and balancing that and saying, you know what, how do we manage this? Not, oh, this is going to be in my backyard, I'm immediately going to say no to it. But like finding a balance. And I think that's, that's hard sometimes to say this could potentially impact me in some way. But guess what? When I bought my house and I have 8 acres of woods in my backyard, someone can easily go in there and they can build a house in my backyard. And I don't get to choose who moves in there. I don't get to choose if they have dirt bikes. I don't get to choose if they play loud music in the middle of the night. That's just something that is going to be kind of the luck of the draw. And we have no, and like when you buy a piece of property, unless you buy all the property around you, you really kind of have, there's a little bit of chance there. And I know that, and I would hope that everybody knows that. I mean, I see my neighbors, I live on Westview Terrace, and, we have a big chunk of land back there that could easily be developed. And I'm not a proponent for that being developed, but I'm thinking about that when I'm looking at this. So we're not, I don't think any of us are in a vacuum, or trying to like put something on, fellow residents to decrease your property values.
I think everybody's paranoid that something, not saying it's going to, but everybody's, as we're going to Delta, afraid something's going to slip through the back door.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to say, holy Christ, what?
We try.
And we really focused, because we did have one person come to us with this idea that raised the issue, and we looked at it, and we spent a lot of time before we had the big crowds here trying to think of how we could draft an ordinance that maybe wouldn't even include this applicant, but that would be for sort of any hypothetical, and looking for things that we would want to come and things that we wouldn't, and trying to get it so that you can sort of, as evenly as possible, come up with what we want to be in East Hampton. And I think you're right that there's sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and you see it sometimes where there's been an ordinance that's drafted for one specific project, and you're not thinking about all the other things that might let through the door. And we've been trying really hard to make sure that A, we're not crafting this for that specific project, and maybe that doesn't even fall under our final bylaw, but also that we don't focus on just that and not pay attention to all the things that might slip through the cracks. Because I think you're right that we've all heard from the last 2 meetings about various concerns that I think are legitimate and sort of a nightmare scenario that could arise. And we want to make sure that that's, if not entirely eliminated, at least minimized so much that it's not likely.
Well, thank you for that. I really do. I really mean that. Thank you. And I didn't thank you, Jessica Allen, for what that was most of the information I understood when you were just talking to the board. I'm going, wow, I didn't know that. And then when, what's her name, Miss Duda?
Yeah.
She got up and talked, and that was very informative, knowing about the motel, hotel, and whatever.
Absolutely.
So anyways, I apologize for being nasty the last week.
Hey, look, we're smiling.
You're forgiven.
So, I think it would be good to talk about what Jim brought up, which is looking at ways to mitigate the impact to the neighbors. Maybe, and if we do that at this stage, when a project does come forward, it can be kind of it's something that you can latch onto as far as we're trying to minimize the impact to the neighbors.
Yep.
So the spirit and intent is clear.
So
I hear your concern about when you came to East Hampton, you bought on Westview Terrace because, gosh, you had beautiful woods behind you. Listen, I've heard the story many times in my business. People like to have some woods, privacy, and you said you were a little concerned about, well, maybe somebody might build a house there at some point in the future, and that's a risk we all take when we do this. Buy a piece of property and live there. What about if they plopped a motel right there?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And there were 8 or 10 units or 12 units or 15 or I don't know how many.
I don't know if it could be any clearer than that.
We don't seem, well, I think there's a big difference between somebody building a single family house
I'm thinking of my backyard when we're drafting
and wondering if we're going to have some noise or whether the person's going to be a good neighbor or whether we're going to have 10 or 15
so even
or
if they
12.
weren't, my neighbors across the street would drown them out anyway, so.
So let's limit it. So what are some tools we can do to limit it? Reduce the number of potential residents.
Put a business in business zone. That's what you can do.
Which
So you would be
essentially
comfortable,
kills the whole thing.
Would you be uncomfortable with any of this in any residential district?
When I look at this, I see it as a thinly veiled plan to place motels in residential neighborhoods.
And if we minimized it to the point where someone could only have 2 seasonal cottages on a 5-acre lot or something like that, going to an extreme, as opposed to being able to build an 8-unit apartment building or something like that, would that still make you uncomfortable because of the commercial nature of the business?
Becoming more like the bed and breakfast.
I can see 2 units in a residential neighborhood with certain number of acreage, with proper buffers, and a commercial activity similar to the bed and breakfast. I think most people in this room, if a bed and breakfast operated next door to them and they had 2 guests a night, okay, fine. Kind of fits in.
You might be surprised. But
Yeah,
I think I see nods in the audience. I don't know.
I feel like if we said there was going to be 2 units in a 5-acre lot or 5 units on a 5-acre lot, there's still going to be people that say this. That doesn't mean that because we have 2 units on a lot, there's not going to be derelicts playing loud music and drinking beer. I mean,
absolutely.
So I don't see that the number of units really solves the issue that people have, the concerns people have. So I don't think that. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think that solves the problem.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think the number of units solves the problem. It's who you get into those units and how you set it up and how the rules and regulations for those units are set up.
But I also
that
think
will help that person running that business say, no, you can't. I'm not gonna allow you to stay here, or you're too noisy, or you're not up to par. You gotta give them the leeway to say you're out. but the number of units, well, I know what you're gonna.
No,
No,
I
no.
actually no. I was just suddenly thinking, as a business owner, if I was owning this
Right.
business, and I spent, say, $100,000 a unit to build these things because they have to meet building code, and
Right.
this isn't just a shack, like you said. He's valid point. This is not going to be a shack. These are going to be really well built buildings with heat, and so I'm not going to rent it to someone who's damaging my property or who's causing harm to the land or the people or my property that I built. Or so I would think that as a property, as a business owner, I would get rid of those people anyway. I might be wrong about that. Maybe I'd be like, oh, I got to pay the bills next month, so let's keep them in another week. I don't know, but I feel like if I was doing it, I would want to make sure the people I'm renting to are going to respect the work I've done on the land. So I don't see it as being a big issue. These are not transient. Transient is not a bad word. Transient just means you're
They're just out of towners.
Yeah, my grandparents are transient. My parents are transients. They live in a trailer and they travel the world. It's fantastic. I want to be them. So I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. It's that. I'm done with the point. I'm just rambling.
So,
Yeah, you're.
I mean, it seems like we need more time for this, and we
Yes.
probably need to continue it.
I want to say, I just want to point out it's 7:30.
Yeah.
And we still have, the planning board has still 2 more items to deal with, so.
So can we-
I feel like we need to either
Yeah, so
set
let's
some,
talk
either
about what
tell me
steps we
what,
can take to.
tell me
to-
what you wanted,
It's your sale.
you need from me before we
I would say,
continue.
and to jump off Jim's point, is to let's see how we can mitigate for potential neighbors. Maybe looking at setbacks, maybe looking at the way that the site is laid out, or if there's language that we can insert to really actively advocate for the people that might be affected by this in the neighborhood. And then I think it's also worth looking at the stay. Do we want to keep it at 90 days so people's grandparents can come and stay for the summer, or is that too much? If we want it to be something that, parents of Williston or Smith or, people that are just coming in and want to stay a week and they explore the area, that's kind of the vision I had, so, but you never know, maybe someone's looking for an apartment and they need 30 or 60 days to, have a place to stay before they move into somewhere else.
Yeah, plus the
So
number
there are
of
some kind of
units.
intangibles that, but I think that those are from my perspective, those are the 2 things. So the time and the mitigation for the neighbors.
I think I
I
also
would
like
add
to
a third thing, the number of units.
Okay. I'd also
Agree, I
Jessica,
agree, Eric.
like to
I mean,
ask
Chet,
if we relegated it to a business district, are there any properties that would qualify, and how many? Is it 1? Is it 10?
Which business district?
Oh, okay. All
Any of them?
all, any of the typical business, commercial
So
districts.
downtown business, no.
No.
Highway business,
We don't
a
have to do it
couple.
now.
Maybe the stop and
There's
shop.
a-
or something. Courtney?
There's a handful of large parcels left on
I-
highway
I'm not
business.
sure, when you ask that question, if you need to have a 5-acre minimum at that point.
Well, see, that's, I need to,
Yeah, it
that's
has
my,
to be-
ser-
when-
that's
when
my
we're
search
talking- when we're
criteria.
talking
Yeah,
about
search
highway
criteria,
business.
5 acres or more. That's
Why
That's what we were talking about, at
5
least
acres
5
in
acres.
the business district. If
Well,
this is,
if you have an acre, you can't get many cottages on an acre.
Well, in the business district, you'd probably do something more like a
Traditional
like a
motel.
Motel.
It
Right.
is.
Right.
This is kind of more like a rustic
Yeah, you're
place
right.
that's a different kind of get.
It is
It's
a
different
motel.
feel.
We don't need
I
to
would,
do
I would
anything.
advocate for a smaller parcel of land.
Okay.
2.5 acres, 2 acres, in the highway
She needs
business.
marching
So-
orders.
Yeah, I need marching orders. This sounds like a dialogue and a discussion that the board still needs to hash out. So what I feel like I can do is to just bullet on, like, I'm just gonna continue to put drafts up on the website, and
Yeah.
what I can do here is, we've already got notes on here that we haven't addressed yet. One of them was the time limit set, so that's already something that the board has already looked at and had to figure out. I can add the sanitary code, that's easy. And there were other items to discuss that were already bulleted out. Should there be an acreage or open space set aside limitation different for each zoning district? For instance, should the open space set aside be higher for the R80 zone versus the R35 zone? That's something that was brought up last meeting. Should there be an additional buffer requirements for sound mitigation? That was the second thing. So we're already, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna continue this bulleted list. And I'm
and
gonna,
keep
go ahead.
And
adding
also,
to it.
and also investigate the residency for schools issue, so we can also get
Yep.
that information.
So,
Oh, yeah.
so what I have is time, which is already on there.
Hmm.
Mitigation, which is, we've mentioned for sound, but maybe there's other mitigation.
Yep.
Other than sound. Number of units, so essentially density requirements.
I think that's more the idea that works. I mean, we talked about that when we put this draft together, and what we ended up with was basically saying if it was safe enough for the fire code, that the side and front setbacks and all of that would meet that number, but
Right.
maybe we can put a greater, separation between the structures that would basically act as a limitation on the units by the density of the parcel.
Right.
Okay.
Realizing that we're not gonna be able to have a number, because it's gonna be all.
Right, and you're already
relative to each
limiting the
lot.
density because right now there's a 30% set aside for open
Right.
space. So you're already
Right.
taking 30% of that 5 acres off the table
Mm-hmm.
and being set aside for open
Yep.
space. So that's an easy way to sort of limit the density, but if there's
Right.
other things. Okay.
Right.
So do you want me to look into this commercial 5 acres?
I think
I
I
think
need that
so.
information to determine if it's even a valid argument to say it should only be.
Okay, so we'll do a map at some point. If regulated to a commercial zone, how many 5-acre parcels?
Yeah.
Let's start with 5 and see how many there are. We need to go. We need to.
How
go
about I do
smaller.
this? We'll do a 5-acre parcel analysis, and then we can do like a 2-acre parcel
Sure.
analysis?
Sure, that'd be
Or
great.
2.5?
2.5.
2.5.
All right.
It'll just give us
Jessica-
the numbers to quote to.
Okay, and the residents for the school issue?
Yep. How long do you want for this? Do you want us a month?
It's
Should we
up to
push
the
it out?
board on how do you want to.
I think we need to
No.
do a month because
You're the one doing
mapping,
the work.
Well, I'm not doing any work. I'm just writing this in a bullet list and I'm doing a map.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I'm doing,
Now
these
that-
are things that the board and council need to discuss and come to consensus on. I don't think there's anything I can do to propose to, it sounds like these are bigger
Yep.
policy issues
Do you
that
have a lot
need
on
to
the
be.
agenda in 2
we
weeks?
have recreational marijuana.
Yeah.
We need to get that. We need to. I know.
Thank you.
That's,
Right.
and we
Good
pushed
job.
you up enough on that. So.
Okay.
Give it a month?
Yeah, let's do 2 meetings from now.
Okay, so that, where's my? phone?
15.
So the second meeting in August, which is August 1st,
I won't be around, and neither will Councilor Derby.
on the 15th?
Not.
So
the next
we
one.
could go to September 5th.
That's a better choice in our opinion.
That's
September
fine.
5th?
Yep.
Continue to
September
September
5th?
5th?
Motion to continue the public hearing with city council for the zoning amendment on seasonal cottage for our September 5th meeting, and I am getting tired.
Second.
All in
can't-
favor?
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
We're good.
So for the public, I will amend this document. It'll be housed, on the, I think it's the plan, it's either planning board or planning department. I'm pretty sure it's planning board, and there's a folder for zoning amendments, and there's a folder specifically for this, and all of the versions of this are on the website. So if you need public documents or you want a copy of this, you can get it on the website. Okay?
All
We're
right.
gonna close and let you guys.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know.
Second.
Okay, all in
Who
favor?
seconded? Who
Thanks, guys.
seconded that
Thank
motion?
you.
Take
Wait, you
care.
get to go home?
There we go.
See you later.
All right, and members of the public, please feel free to come back September 5th. Continue this discussion.
And bring friends.
And bring friends.
They asked 2 people.
I need a-
All right,
All right.
moving right along. Moving right. Let's give everyone a second.
Who needs candy? Anybody? I got a whole pile of it.
Yeah.
Where are we moving along to?
We're moving along. Please hold.
You want to take a 2-minute
Forefront?
recess? Or no?
No, I'm just gonna let people.
Sure.
An informal
Yes.
recess.
You.
Oh, we're gonna do forefront.
I couldn't help but thinking during that discussion what more we can do to get people here. And the thing that kept occurring to me again and again is donuts.
There you go.
All right.
If I can get it, I wanna get it.
Oh, Jessica, do you know how
Thank
to
you.
turn this on?
Oh, sweet banana goodness.
Sweet banana business.
I'm so glad we got that on tape.
You guys know
Jessica and I like banana goodness.
You could put a noise ordinance in, and then after 11, if there's loud music, people can call the cops. And
That's quite an ordeal.
I can imagine.
Why, you intend to be noisy after 11?
As if we get this approved.
All right, is that working?
I turned it on. It takes a minute to warm up.
All right,
What's between my eyes? I'm not sure.
let's.
Oh, there's a cord.
All right, I need to switch paperwork now.
Yep, it's time to move on.
That was fun.
All right,
I thought
folks.
so.
So moving along, the next item on our agenda is the continued public hearing for Plain Street Forefront Power LLC request for special permit. All right, so did everybody have a chance to review these additional documents submitted by the applicant and by the public?
A mountain of information.
Yep.
Which in truth assuaged most of my concerns. Not all. I would love to hear in your timeline for how you
I brought
present
mine
this, Jess,
short,
but I was
very-
unable, and I just want to say correctly, I was unable to
Condensed
attend.
version? Yep, that's what
I
this
had a
is.
familial distraction
I
with a
like
site
this.
visit,
Yep.
which
This
I
is
wanted to
nice.
make with something
All
came up.
these nice
So
colored
if
pictures.
anyone here that did attend the site visit had an opportunity
I
to
stole
discuss
it.
what they saw, I would love to hear
Actually,
your
I asked
viewpoint.
him for it.
Sure.
Sorry, I don't have this input on my computer.
Okay, well, that's okay, they have
Me and
hard
Jesse
copies
had a
of
good walk
everything
through that
and,
night.
Yeah, let's wait a second here.
Yeah.
That's okay, no, we're having technical difficulties. We're gonna go to recess anyway.
I'm driving right
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Just cooler paper.
Yeah, but I want
Feel better?
Okay. Proposed intent.
It's just the extra
It's-
bodies.
Yeah. I think also after 7 o'clock we just turn off the HVAC.
The people that are here that late don't matter apparently.
Exactly. It's just an extra way to speed us up.
Did Jessica make a break for it, or she?
I think she did.
She also needed a 2-minute recess.
Gotcha.
That would have been awesome.
You just hear screeching outside.
See you next month.
Call me at the brass cat.
Let me ask you a
He's gonna FaceTime the rest of
question.
us.
Yeah.
What is this electricity going to? Who is going to
Let's wait until everyone's.
process? Who is going to get this electricity?
East End residents.
Talked about it a little bit the last year, but we can definitely get
people
back to
that
that.
have,
Let's wait till Jessica gets back. Oh,
Yeah, I know. I was just trying to see
Oh,
if you
that's
remember.
all right, Ed, you
I have
made it.
in my little catalog.
I know.
It's gonna be special people.
I know.
Send it to anyone?
And here's Jessica. Okay, so before we jump into this one, Jim had a good point that we did a site visit. I think it was June 29th.
Yeah.
Does that sound right? Harry and I were able to attend. There were 3 or 4 members of the public that attended. I found it very helpful to walk the site and see sort of the layout. There, you know, there's, I think maybe Ed can speak to this too. There were trees that were originally going to be removed that are no longer going to be removed. Is that fair?
Yep.
And so you can sort of see, I think, from that side closest to the road anyway, that there's already a natural screening to the point where I don't think there's any way anybody will have any vision of that at all.
Yeah,
The back,
sorry. That central block of trees.
did a slow drive.
Will
Could you
clear
walk
out
up and
a little
touch,
bit.
actually
What's that?
touch where you're talking?
Sure.
No, when I got out and
This
walked
part
it,
right here.
I didn't
Center
walk
block.
How could you walk that? You're a good.
The slope, it kind of curves up.
I went
We may
down,
clear out a little
not
bit on
on
the backside,
Plain
but everything
Street.
at the peak.
I went
on the
down-
front will leave.
Okay, thank you.
and that hill
We may
is
put
pretty.
up a little bit on top, just
Oh,
for
going from on the
screening
back of
over
golf
time, but,
property.
I mean,
Yeah.
for shading
Okay.
over time concerns, but the actual middle green will be left intact.
And that hill is pretty significant
See,
as well,
this
so
is
just
plain,
geographically.
but if
Just
you
geographically,
come up
there's
this
a
way
pretty
and
strong
go up
stretch.
Yeah, I
Check,
know.
check,
We've
check.
seen that.
Up here.
Hold on.
That's where I
You're
was.
saying it's natural screening?
Yeah, I mean, on that side, it's pretty. Harry, would you agree with me that that hill that's sort of between the street and the proposed site and the trees that are on it provide a pretty natural screen
Yeah.
from that side?
Absolutely.
I think that was something that was good to see in person. I mean, it's definitely all clear right now on the other side, which I think is why they've talked about the screening. But I found it very helpful to walk the site, and it was helpful from my perspective. And I know there were members of the public that were also there too. So I think maybe the best way to do this is if you could just go through that cover letter you sent that sort of hit on each of these points, and if we have questions about the specific areas, we can follow up. But I think that was sort of the areas of concern that we had identified at the last hearing, and seems to be covered here.
Sure. So last week we resubmitted some revised plans. We also issued official response to the comments that the planning board had at their meeting last month. The first comment the board had was the dimensions of the transformer box. As you can see, we responded, it's about 6 feet by 6 feet. We included the details in the plans. I could flip to them if you'd like right now.
I think that's okay.
Okay, but they're in there just to show you. We also included in this document the cut sheets that have the actual pictures of the transformer box itself in here as well.
Where is the transformer box located?
I'll show you. In the back here, in front of the screening is along here, and that would be right here.
So where's
Yep.
And so it's just the one transformer box, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And we're using string inverters that are small, and so the only thing that would be on that pad would just be the actual transformer. There's not going to be any large central inverters right now.
Okay, you gotta go back and tell me what a string inverter is.
A string inverter, so
it's like
there's
Star Wars.
Central, yeah, there's central inverters which can collect, so you could have 2 central inverters here, and you could have one that collected all the electricity from this array and convert it from AC to DC, and then from this array from AC to DC run it right to the transformer box and over. Or you can use string inverters that are just much smaller, so it only deals with like 18 panels as opposed to 200 panels. And it allows, for us, it allows us to monitor and be able to go out and address if there's any lack in production issues or anything like that. We can go out and we can address it.
To make sure I understand what you said correctly, many smaller DC to AC converters as opposed to a couple of it.
Correct.
And they're all located, I'm sorry, they're all located in that one transformer? Oh, they're on the back of each panel, okay.
Yeah. Well, not each panel, but like the end of a row.
A row, okay. Thank you.
Okay.
The next comment was regarding a summary of the flow dissipation and for the design to consider improvements for flow leveling at the lowest point of the gravel diaphragm.
And can you explain what that all meant too?
So the gravel diaphragm is a stormwater mechanism that basically is a ditch with gravel in it that allows inflow, and it kind of dissipates that way. As we said, flow dissipation and flow leveling are already provided. Any flow within the stone diagram that does infiltrate would eventually collect at the low point between the proposed contours. So essentially, the diaphragm would run along the contours and it would collect in the low point of the diaphragm. Excess storm water would pool in the diaphragm until overtopping, until it can't hold anymore.
Yep.
And then it would disperse across the vegetated buffer over a length of 245 feet.
Okay.
Still staying on the property though, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not impacting any other property owners nearby with any stormwater?
We will comply with all of the stormwater guidelines.
Okay.
Well, can I just ask him to go through this and then we can do questions? I'm definitely gonna get you up here. Thank you.
You guys requested a breakdown of the 35,000 financial surety bond. I redid the numbers, and ended up bumping it up to 110,000. I could show you the numbers right now. If you want me to flip to it, I'm happy to.
There is one copy of this binder right in front of you. Okay, it's also in there.
Oh. I will just take that.
Okay.
It's
attachment C.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I went through and I stuck in line items of everything that would be covered in the bond, and the approximate price, labor cost, and then what, obviously, if we're gonna go and we have to decommission it, some of this stuff is able to be sold. And so I put in the price that we would be able to sell it at. And then if you look down here, we included overhead and then arrived at we would put up a $110,000 bond, and most likely after we all said and done, we'd come out of pocket, or it would be about $90,000.
Okay, and so that, I mean, you have to estimate these numbers as in whether you'd have to decommission it in 3 years or in 20 years, right? Or is that what you would do? Are these numbers for what it would cost, like right now to do that, or does it build in, you know, increases in some of these costs over the life of the?
That is in today's costs.
Okay.
But we added a 10% markup.
Okay.
To sort of accommodate inflation and everything like that.
Okay.
So you can go back and we can tweak them.
So you had a 10% markup and you still came up at 90,000 as opposed to the 110?
I came up with 110 with and without the markup.
Okay.
And then after we sold everything, less what we were able to recycle and sell, like the metal and the glass and the silicon and the copper and everything. It would end up being 90. We'd be happy to get a bond for 110.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
And yeah, so we take the bond just for financial. So we would take the bond, and then we actually.
So I'd have to talk to the financial director about how to do this, because typically we have a financial surety, and when the project's complete, we give it back to them.
Yeah.
This
Right.
is different. This
It
is
is.
like having access to a bond.
A savings account, yeah.
Or whatever the surety is, and I'd like to have a conversation with her about how that would work.
Yep.
And then, you know, when do we decide that it's all good and we return it back? And I don't know, from the company's perspective, I know that with a contractor, when they take out a bond, the bond company kind of holds that against them for the period of time that bond is out. And then if they don't need it, they return it, and then they sort of get that credit back that they can use for other projects. I don't know how that works internally with this company and how sureties work and how that's handled. So it's a little fuzzy to me. This isn't typical, I guess.
I know that we've done it before, and we do it with other projects. I haven't specifically worked on one with this company yet, so I don't know exactly how they do it, but
we'll figure it
I know
out.
that it's something that we'll be able to figure out.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And it is described in our bylaws though, right? There's financial surety,
So it doesn't have to be a bond.
either through escrow account, bond, or otherwise.
Right.
Cover the cost of removal.
Kind of what we like for sureties often is letters of credit.
Right.
Yeah.
Because we can cash them in really easy. It's hard for municipality to kind of pull on a bond, is my understanding.
Yeah,
I haven't had to
that's
do
true.
it, thankfully, but that's my understanding. So we actually prefer letters of credit, but again, I don't know if the company wants to have a letter of credit that's going on and on and on for 20 years, and if it doesn't get renewed, then it just, you know, you have to renew a letter of credit annually, and it has to come from the municipality.
Right.
In my
But the
experience.
bond has costs too.
But the bond
So-
has costs too. So I think
We
the
should have a
language could be,
conversation.
well, the language could be that there needs to be a financial surety, that in some language about agreement between the two parties, you know, because in subdivisions, the law allows the developer to pick whatever surety works for them. We don't
Right.
have a say.
Right.
So I almost feel it's equitable to sort of have that same dialogue here with this applicant and say what surety works for you, and, you know, have that back and forth. As long as we have the number set,
Right.
we can figure out the details later.
Do you have a preference as far as what the form of that surety is, or?
I do not
Okay.
right now. I can go back and check. It's
Okay. I think that's a pretty easy issue for us to all work out, so, okay, great, thank you.
The next item was the requested the stormwater design at the roadway entrance, specifically at 115 Plain Street. As we all know, that driveway is going to have to need to be replaced. So once we go and we replace the concrete there, we would make sure that it would be slightly graded away from the resident's house in order to provide not cause any undue harm to the stormwater to their property and cause the flooding. We'll avoid the wall. Now we saw the wall last time we were there. I'm very aware of it. We will not go anywhere near it. And so yeah.
And that, having been there too, that is safely removed off to the side, that I don't think there's any concern that, you know, trucks or anything are gonna hit that wall. Would you agree, Harry? I mean, that's not really on the roadway, so I think that's good.
Will it be near the roadway when the roadway is completed grading? When the roadway is actually the finished width?
I don't think so. It's pretty set back into the yard there.
So you're talking about Plain Street or the access road?
Access road.
The access road will run right by it, but we're gonna pave up until that road, and then it'll go to gravel.
Right.
Requested an assessment of the existing culverts to determine if they can handle the load of construction and emergency vehicles. We had someone go out there, and the only culvert that they could find was actually to the northwest of the property. If you want, I can flip to it. I added it back to the plan. They did not find anything underneath the access road.
So the roadway that you come out to Plain Street to the site, it doesn't go over any culverts, or that's what they? Okay.
But if you want it, I can show
Sure.
you.
You've got a culvert shown though.
I think that was the source, right? Is that we saw one on the plan?
Right at Plain Street, right in front of the house.
I thought there was one further back too.
Well, they had pictures of one further back, but that was the. I'm sorry, I missed the site visit. I wanted to look at where it was.
So this is northwest of the site. This was the existing box culvert.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
This is the property line right here. This is Crestview Drive. This is where that culvert is, and this is the sewer that it goes down into.
here.
That's
and
fine.
this actually goes through that wetland.
Yep.
So all of that would be west of the
Maintained.
array.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the small culvert underneath the access road at Plain Street, you've assessed that, and that's going to be okay.
I don't see that culvert on here. We couldn't find it out there. There's a culvert. It looks like there may be sewer right here.
You show a 16-inch culvert right here with the low arrow. Is that right? Or is actually the low arrow going each way? So I'm not sure what that is.
It looks like it's going each way.
Yeah, which doesn't make sense.
And I think there's two other ones marked on these plans too, on the access road further out, right?
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. That's a width. That's a width. That's not
Yeah.
culvert. That's
Yeah, this is
16
width.
feet, 11 feet.
And
So
then
there
this
is
is
nothing.
the sewer. Yeah, there is no culvert there.
Okay.
No.
The property owner actually mentioned that there was some sort of.
I didn't notice any, but I wasn't looking
No.
for them, I have to say. Okay.
There's none found.
I did ask many times.
Okay. Yeah, it was discussed at the hearing for sure, but I have to admit I wasn't looking for one when I was out there, but, okay.
Sorry. Did you want to look?
I was just gonna give it a quick, I just wanted to.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay.
We did some research into the potential effects of the valuation on properties. Actually, there's been more research done on wind than there has solar. And wind actually does tend to have some impacts on surrounding property values, mainly because birds fly into the bins and end up on your property. There's also flicker and shadow flicker and other things like that. There hasn't been really any conclusion either way as to whether or not it's going to impact property. Pretty in depth last time. We're going to be providing as much screening along that back property line as we can in order to ensure that the site will not be able to, the panels won't be able to see from our neighbors in the rear.
This attachment E was really helpful. I don't know if everyone else had a chance to look at this. This is prepared by the state, and it went through many of the sort of health concerns that I think the public had, sort of one by one, and basically explained, you know, why they're not a concern, whether it's the hazardous materials or the, you know, what are the EMF, and the thermal islands, and the property valuation. And they really go through each one and seem to sort of discount those as concerns for projects like this, which I thought was really interesting. It was very helpful to have something from the state too that's a little bit more, and there's a lot of stuff out there.
The links, yeah, the links are great.
Yeah, from my perspective, as I went through that, those were check boxes off the list.
Right.
Cool.
Speaking of thermal impacts, we provided an additional study, and actually, they do more, the thermal impacts seem to be more of a concern out in the desert because you're changing the actual ground from a white, low albedo surface to a darker, higher albedo surface, so it doesn't reflect, it actually it changes the actual color of the ground cover. So that's one of the reasons when you're going from a green to a blue, there really isn't that much change in the actual absorption rate of the light itself. That being said, they really weren't able to find much impacts to surrounding properties as a result of the heat island in these types of arrays. And that report was provided.
Okay.
Similarly with EMFs, they actually did do a bunch of, collected a bunch of data, 3 solar arrays around Massachusetts, and they found that there was the EMF levels were at less than 0.5 milligrams at the project perimeter, and dissipates from there. 3 milligrams is the exposure level that's associated with health impacts, so we're significantly under that threshold. We'd be significantly under that threshold with this project.
And also interesting note that 6 inches away from a vacuum cleaner, you're exposed to 300 milligauss of EMFs.
Yes.
So
Those
careful,
evil vacuum
careful
cleaners.
with your vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
That's why I love that.
Jesus.
Okay. Low plasticity soils were not considered impervious because they'll be revegetated. I said low plasticity soils are not considered impervious as these areas were revegetated after final grading.
Which means,
We'll plant
for
grass.
like put that into like layman's terms for the.
Sure. So low plasticity is sort of a compacted soil. We'll go and we will revegetate that, so it wouldn't be changing it from it wouldn't be concrete, or you can still allow water to dissipate for storm water.
So instead of being hard packed dirt, it's going to be taking the field and turning it into hard packed dirt. It's going to be revegetated, so it will be more like the field is now, and will absorb the water.
Right, that's correct. And finally, the difference between medium and moderate was a typo.
Okay.
So moderate should have been used and it's been changed.
Fantastic.
Okay. Any planning board members have questions about this or other areas that?
For me, there's really only one issue that still stands out, and I think we've come a long way with it. There were many issues, we've gone through them, and I really feel you've covered them. But the surety still is the thing that that I have some hesitancy with. I think the schedule that you laid out really is as close as I can reasonably ever assume to get to great details. I'm happy with that. And I think the number you came to seems reasonable. It's much larger. It's much more in the ballpark of where I kind of wanted it to be. I think it's fascinating to me that you brought up the inflation question about.
Well, it's in the bylaw. It says that the estimate is supposed to have a cost of living adjustment included, and but I mean, there's a big buffer in what you've given, so it very well may. I mean, it also limits it. I think it says we can't require more than 125% of the estimated cost for the surety. So.
And you're at 10% over right now. Is that correct? So maybe if we went more like 20 or 30%, somewhere in that range.
Well, I'd be curious if you could even just do a cost of living adjustment to the number and see if that,
Just do a
how that
cost.
changes over the time. I think that that's probably,
Yeah.
at least we can figure out what the number is, and then we can talk more about what form. I think, if Jessica, you want to talk to finance or something? Or?
I want to talk to finance about the process. I also, the city engineer, I asked him to take a look at this and provide me comment, and he didn't provide me comment, so I don't know if that means he just didn't get to it or whether he didn't have any comments. But it was I mean, it says in our ordinance, I'm pretty sure it says that the city engineer is it for this one, or maybe that's just for the special permit? But I would want him to put his eyes on it.
Well, I think we're going to have to continue this anyway, so hopefully that'll give him more time.
Okay.
But
Anybody?
I'm sorry, I just want to note, though, that for me, it's really just down to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is a 20-year life project? So that would be, we do cost of living for 20 years?
We're going to do 20 years, and then there's 2 5-year options on the PPA, so it could be up to 30.
Okay.
But 20 is what the.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable to the cost of living for 20 years.
I think that makes sense.
Based on
Concur.
historical trend lines.
Okay, are there any other board members who have questions before we open it to the public? Yep.
Yeah, would it be feasible to bury the lines, would it come out of the field to Plain Street?
Sure, but the residents there have to understand that they're going to be disturbed twice, because we're going to have to repave to get in, to get the construction.
Yeah, but once it's constructed, that'd be the end of it, right?
But no, because we'd have to pave everything over to get in order to build it, and then we'd have to dig up that pavement in order to run the lines back out. So they would be disturbed twice. I mean, we're happy to.
Twice on, and how much of a period of time?
Not very long.
Yeah, why are you paving it the first time? Or just creating a construction road? Or
Well, we
paving
have
the
to-
construction road?
Well, the concrete at the base would need to be replaced, and
Okay.
and there would need to be some. We have to put down, like they have rough pavement basically in order to knock off the dirt for
Yeah.
construction vehicles
Yeah,
coming in and out. So
construction
there would have
entrance.
to be some work done there,
Yeah.
and then we wouldn't leave it that way. We'd want it to be finished when we did it. So we'd have to go back in and just look. We're happy to bury it. I just want everyone to know that it would.
We would like that.
Okay, well,
but
hold
people-
on though, we'll set that aside, we can definitely hear comment on that.
But just that there will have to be work done at that neighbor's driveway at the beginning of the project and at the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Well, by burying the lines, it eliminates the trees. You don't have to worry about trees ever growing up there ever again, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Right,
because you got a
right.
woods right next door to it.
Yeah.
So it'd eliminate that, and would take any concern of people that are living next to that driveway, you know, for TV reception and,
Well, yeah, yeah.
you know, computer reception or that type of thing.
Yeah.
We're happy to bury it.
Okay.
Okay, well, let's set that aside at least so we can hear from the public, but, Chet, do you have any comments at this point, or can I open this up to see?
No, you can go ahead. I have no comments.
You wanna kick us off? Come all the way up, you get the podium, sir.
No problem.
Just give us your name and address too to get it in the record.
Kevin Bowden, 119. I've been asked to step up for Laura Madrowitz, and Marie couldn't be here. She's at 115, the two residents who are on either side of the road that we're talking about. And from what they've expressed to me, the double dig up to put it underground, they would still want it underground. They both expressed that as their primary reason for asking me to come. You were going through the planning, and I had a question about, you said you called it a diaphragm that you were gonna run water off of, and my question would be, is that diaphragm permeable, or will it be holding water? Or I'm worried about a mosquito increase back there.
No, it would be permeable on the bottom, and it would allow just the dissipation. Basically, just allows the water to kind of settle and infiltrate at a natural rate. It allows it to collect in sort of one place and then dissipate.
Okay, so we wouldn't be creating an artificial wetland there that's gonna increase mosquitoes. Those, I think you answered the rest of our questions pretty well with the research that you did since the first time.
So, sorry, Mr. Bowden, is that what it is?
Yes.
Yes, okay, and you were at the site visit, right?
I
You
was.
spoke a little bit there, great. So you were here, also you said you were on behalf of the two homeowners on either side of the road, is that right?
Madrowitz, and I don't know Marie's last name.
Okay, but on either side of that,
Yes.
the access road there?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Anybody else?
Good evening. Bob Parent. I live at 4 South Street. I've been a resident of town for 26 years, and I just want to speak in favor of this project. A little bit of background for what it's worth. I'm looking at my notes I've written down. For the past 2.5 years, I've served as the DPW superintendent in the town of East Long Meadow, and have served as town engineer for a significant piece of that. So I'm very familiar with projects like this. I've reviewed projects like this on behalf of the town of East Long Meadow. Before that, I spent 30 years in the consulting engineering business, so this is all very familiar to me. I did a quick run on the future value at 3% escalated over 20 years. It's an 80% add. It's significant. 3% year after year after year does add significantly, so you may want to consider going up to the maximum that's allowed. I think you indicated
80,000, 80,000?
180% if you take
Oh,
1.03 and
180%.
escalate that.
Okay.
That you raise it to a power of 20 for, it comes
As
out
a
to
quick-
1.8.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
It's good to know, thank you.
And just overall in favor of it, everybody would like to leave property untouched, but I'm a big believer that if you don't own the property, you know, the property owner has the right to develop the property to the extent that the town regulations and bylaws and policies allow. As developments go, solar projects about the lowest possible impact you can get in terms of impact and groundwater impact, of noise impact, and town services, things like that. And the really interesting thing is 20 years from now, the property can essentially be returned to current use. So you're not taking property away, you're not paving property, you're really using it temporarily and giving it back at the end of the tenure. So I
Great.
recommend approving.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
For Andrew,
Hendrick Street. In 1899, my grandfather bought some of that property, and then about 1952, my father inherited it. And then about 1970, I bought it, and now it belongs to the town, I know that. But when I had it, it was explained to me that there was a 15-foot rite of passage there, can't be obstructed. It was given to Alfred Tomazeski and his heirs and assignees. I couldn't even I couldn't put in a fence post on that property. And I'm sure the town is taking care of that, but that was one of my concerns. If you haven't, maybe I was kind of concerned, how come we're giving a corporation use of city property? I guess that's my concern. And the other one is, it's always been close to my heart ever since I took down my grandfather's house, and whatever that was. Your zoning, section 705, I think it is, talks about 15% of the lot can be covered with impervious materials. And I looked up your definition of impervious materials, and it doesn't have to be sitting on the ground. If it's above the ground and it keeps the rainwater from going into that ground, it's impervious. And looking at that, it looks like that is a whole lot more than 15% of that area. I'm just wondering if you're just ignoring that part of the zoning. Those are my, and I have solar panels on my roof, okay? I'm not opposed to solar panels.
Thank you. Jessica, can I ask about that impervious? Or Ed, if you know?
Sure. Mass DEP does not consider the panels to be, they consider them to be pervious.
Okay.
There's enough spacing in between the rows to allow the water to shut off. The only part that is going to be to go from pervious to, or from impervious to pervious, or from the other way around, would be the point at which the foundation meets the ground, which we included in our calculations.
So that's a state regulation?
I mean, there's also solar exemptions in the state zoning law. I don't have the I don't have the zoning.
That would seem to me to stop just about any solar array project that would go up, and we've seen
Actually,
solar
I do
array
have it.
projects. I can't imagine that they would. Yeah, that's not, that just couldn't.
Well, I mean, we have time too, so maybe if you could get us that regulation, that might help us. I mean, that's,
On what? What do you want? What do you want?
Who do you
Sorry.
He named it as 70.
So, Section 9B of the State Zoning Act has a section on solar access.
Right.
And solar energy systems may be exempted from setback, building height, and roof and lot coverage restrictions under the State Zoning Act.
What was the first concern that you had said? I missed the 15-foot right of way.
So the property adjacent to it is the Gustina Conservation Property, and it's a shared right-of-way access. I can't speak to what happened before my tenure, so I don't know what happened, but,
Is this project impacting that at all?
I would use the right, it would improve and use the right of way in order to access the site, but it's an access, it's a right of way for access.
Yeah, so you're not actually preventing access by your roadway.
That's correct.
it's probably improving access and allowing some off-street parking, I would think, to that
Yeah.
area. but-
Yeah.
Because you're paving it.
Well, and all of the fencing and construction is actually on the private property as opposed to the
Correct.
The easement.
town property or on the right of way.
Okay.
I question that, seriously.
We can look into it. I mean, if we have time, I can pose a question to the city solicitor regarding it, but
What-
I think they have legal rights because they have an easement agreement, the Tomascos, I can't say the name. Thomas property. You know, it was one of the first questions I asked when we had a pre-development meeting is, you know, this is the access, this is on city land, and there are deeds that show that they have the right, to use this as
Use it, yeah,
access,
of
because it
course.
was for a farm road in the back.
Right.
To the back fields, so it doesn't,
Right.
I mean, that's a legal right that property has, even though the
Right.
city owns it, there's still that legal
Right.
easement, so I don't see
Well,
how
I don't
it's.
see it would either.
Sir, what part of that surprises you?
I think you're under the impression that the city owns that property from Plain Street down.
They do, but there's a legal deed easement, yeah.
I understand that, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to explain that to you. They have, Tomaszewski has a 50-foot right of passage over that property.
Yeah.
Okay, for a distance of, I think it's 150 feet, and then it reduces to 15 feet to their property.
Yeah.
It was because, you know, they have no access to,
Right.
no street access.
Right, so what-
They can't build upon that. That is a unobstructed right for both the city
Right.
and Tomaszewski.
Right. So if that roadway is improved, that doesn't take away any. It actually benefits them.
How about I just put on my list of something
Yes.
to look into?
Thank you.
Okay.
You raise good points.
Anybody else from the public who's got any comments, questions, concerns? Any board members have anything else to add before we continue this?
No, I think it's.
Do you, Jessica, feel like you've got a good list of?
I think there was only, I only have one thing.
I think just the surety.
Yeah, the inflate, the kind of cost of living increase. So we get more information on that, right? Well, that was actually you,
That
right?
seems answered to me personally, but I don't
The
know
what?
if you want, well, what Bob had put forth in terms of the calculations. I know Bob professionally and I trust his
Me
judgment.
too, I think
I would,
it's-
if I actually went to a consultant to
Sure.
ask, I would go to
I
Bob.
was gonna ask Ed anyway, so I wouldn't put that on you.
Yeah.
But if you wanna come with a number and let us know what you think that would be.
Sure, I can take a look and.
Yeah, just
rerun
to
the
add the
numbers.
cost of living
Yeah.
stuff. And then the.
I mean, if you can't go above 125,
Right.
That's probably gonna just be the limit.
but, you know.
Well, no, 125% of whatever the cost is.
I see.
Right. So what we're
So
saying
if
is.
we estimate at 100 grand, we could require $125,000.
All right.
And then the issue of the state
I'd be
exemption.
happy to sign up for the $125,000.
No,
If
I
that.
think I misunderstood.
Yeah, I think I thought I
Well,
did
we're
too.
estimating the 110, so 125% of 110 is close.
Which is, right, yeah.
Close enough. But, yeah.
Okay, and then I guess the right-of-way issue.
Yep,
and
so
the issue-
surety, the right-of-way issue.
And then if we
and
can
to
find
talk
out
to
this
the-
issue with the impervious, the sort of exemption for the panels.
I don't think.
So you want me to find the DEP language, or do you want him to provide
Well,
the DEP language?
Ed mentioned a regulation or something. Maybe we can get a copy of that.
So
and see
if
to try
Ed
to-
could provide the DEP standard regarding impervious, I mean, personally, I think it's exempted no matter what because of the state zoning act.
Yeah.
Agree.
It's saying
That's-
lot coverage is an exempted
If it's exempted, it's exempted.
item under the state zoning act, so
It's clear right there for me.
I don't know.
Okay.
But
And I
if
wanna
you
loop
feel
back.
like, if the board feels like we want that DEP language too, just as a
If
backup.
no one else cares, that's fine.
Listen, you said.
Actually, I read something today that it was a directive, I think it came out in like 2014, from Mass DEP where it specifically recommends excluding it from the calculation for lot coverage. and
Yeah.
panels.
Okay.
So for surety, we've got forefront power that has to give new numbers.
I
Right?
think we should skip that. If it's gonna be 125%, we're at 110, that's 127.50. Just make that the number.
But what we're saying is that doesn't have the cost of living increase.
But you said that even if he adds it in, we can't go over 100.
No, 125% with the cost of
with the
living.
co-
Oh, plus
Yeah.
the cost of
That
Yeah,
helps me
so
understand.
that
That's-
number is supposed to have the
then
cost
we
of living
do
adjustment.
Absolutely want. the
Okay,
cost of living.
so
I
he's
understand
gonna
that now.
he's gonna
Yeah.
rerun numbers and come back with another number based on that information. I'm gonna talk to the financial director about how we would do this over a 20-year period and just get a sense from her. Okay.
That sounds good.
All right, that's one. I'm just reading this back because it's late and I
Yeah.
want to make sure I have everything. Second one has to do with the city right-of-way
Yeah.
and the language in the deed.
I think that's it.
We have that. pretty handy if you need me to send it over.
Okay, I think I have it somewhere. I think I might have pulled it, but if you want to send it, and then I'll just double check it, that's fine. Okay.
Will be amended to vary the line.
Yep, we can do the line bearing as a condition.
So you want me to add to the draft conditions, the electrical lines need to be buried, or it's not all the it's the access from the
Transmission lines.
transmission lines?
From the site to Plain Street.
So how far, when would you like that to start, or would you like, would you?
Transform?
Okay.
To transformer?
From the transformer to Plain Street.
Okay. Okay.
We got one more comment here. Maybe more math.
No, no math this time, more just a professional opinion. Impervious generally means that water can't flow to the ground. And if you think about the way that solar panels work, is the water runs off the panel, hits the edge of the panel, hits the ground, and even if it doesn't run into the ground immediately below there, then it still goes underneath the next panel.
Right.
So you have that entire infiltrative surface still available to you. You just essentially have an umbrella over the top of it that changes how the water gets shed to the ground a little bit, but it's still going to the ground. The ground is nowhere impacted or impeded in terms of being able to infiltrate groundwater. So I don't believe that something above the surface is considered an impervious surface, like a pavement or something like that.
Right. So for example, a deck. If you put a deck on your backyard and you space it, I can't remember how wide the planks have to be, but there's a certain width that if you make it, it doesn't count as impervious surface on your backyard. And I would argue that does a better job of holding water and it affects infiltration more than like the inner row spacing in a solar array.
Yeah, that's the point. It's all moved.
Anybody have anything else at this point?
Okay, so we got surety,
And we need a date.
city right of way, and the draft, adding to the draft conditions that the transmission lines from Plain Street to the transformer shall be buried.
Yep. Can we do this on August 1st?
Yeah, I think so. This is quick. I think this would be relatively.
I'm asking you two. You're the only two that have anything to do between now and then.
Yeah, I'm just
2 weeks too soon?
I might not be here on August 1st for this
Okay.
meeting. You might be flying solo.
How about the 15th?
You're welcome. Really? You're welcome to do that.
You're not here. We all go on vacation too, right?
That's not true. You have recreational marijuana to talk about.
And we'll be fine with that.
You won't believe what we'll get past.
August,
So the 15th. I think the 15th
August
would be
15th?
better.
Okay.
Yeah,
Does that work
sorry.
for you, Ed? Is that okay?
Come the Easter Bunny.
Do we need a motion? I motion.
Yes, you need a motion.
To continue the public hearing for the special permit for Plain Street 4 Fort Power to
August 15th.
August 15th.
Second,
All in
third,
favor?
fourth.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. All right.
Thank you for
Thank you,
patience
too.
waiting.
Oh, I see the light at the end of the tunnel
We're
here.
almost there. We're almost there. We've got. Thank you. All right. And now for our most patient of all of our applicants.
Guys fall asleep yet?
Good Lord.
During morning would be a long night.
Yeah, I know. But even that warning might not have done it justice.
I'm gonna pay that word by the hour.
All right. New business. Request for a special permit amendment at 412 Main Street, Yankee Hill Machine.
Got your list?
You look familiar.
I got it practically memorized. What is it?
We worked
All right,
out.
I'll try to keep this short since it is late.
Yes.
I'm Christopher Graham from Yankee Machine, and what we are seeking to do is basically correct a mistake on my behalf when we filed our application. When we filed our initial application, the application said that we were going to produce and sell firearms parts. It should have said firearms and parts, because that's what we do. So basically that ampersand kind of changed what that legal document said. So just like the narrative says, the ATF came in to do their audit like they do with all new sites to make sure that we're in compliance with state and local laws as well as the federal ones. And they said, well, there may be an issue because this states sales of parts for firearms. And so we're looking to get that verbiage corrected. We haven't changed the plan or anything because this was our intent going forth the whole time. That's why we have a very robust security system. key card system to limit access to all parts of the shop as well as the retail store. The lighting paths and the handicap access and all that.
So, just to refresh my recollection, because I also thought we had discussed that this was possible down the road at the last hearing, but maybe we didn't. But so, you guys are making parts, but you're making complete firearms on site already, right?
That is correct.
Okay, so
One model, right? There's a rifle, if I recall.
There's basically one model with several different SKUs for it, but
okay, so is it only your firearms that you guys would be selling, or
we
would you
would like to sell, basically have a firearm store in the front of the shop.
So what do you currently do as far as storing and securing, I guess, like finished firearms, right? When they start to become a security risk, how do you store those now?
So we actually store them before they're even considered a finished firearm by the ATF. At our current facility, they're under lock and key, to which the keys only managers have.
Okay.
At the new place, that'll be taken a step further with the electronic system. So even before it becomes a firearm, we track and limit access to all the parts.
And when you say a manager has the key, how many managers are there?
We have about 6 managers that have access to those keys.
Okay, and so that you'll continue to secure the ones that you make that way. How about the ones, assuming you start selling other manufacturers' firearms, how would you store those to keep those secure?
We would store those in a similar manner. The store itself would obviously only be accessed by YHM employees. Obviously, everything would be under lock and key when the store hours weren't open. Typically, we have the firearms in a safe, the handguns and everything get locked up in a secure cabinet.
And then I'm just looking at your cover letter here with the application. It talks about 24-hour closed circuit camera monitoring, motion sensors, glass break sensors, entry sensors. So I mean, really trying to prevent. It's not so much catching someone who does it as much as preventing anybody from having access.
Right,
to be
it's a
able to
lot
steal it.
easier to prevent firearm theft than to try and recover the firearm if it is stolen. So.
Okay. And any idea what sort of volume you would have, understanding that you're not doing that now and you're sort of making a guess?
The guesstimate would pretty much be the same as the original plan. I don't have the exact numbers as to what we said. I'm sure I do, I just don't have it memorized as to what section.
For what? Traffic? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Well, no, I'm curious about like sales, like volume of firearms, basically, like what you would plan on having available in the store for numbers.
Inventory.
So, inventory. There's the word.
Yeah.
Fleet.
It's really hard to estimate.
Yeah.
Because it's all going to be obviously market driven. We plan to have a various array of different firearms so that whatever it be people are looking for, we have something on hand to show them. I guess I don't have a firm number. If I would guess, I would say a handful of different handgun models, a couple of shotguns, and maybe a few bolt-action rifles.
Okay.
Since,
And then the
most
only
semi-automatics are banned at this point. So
the only other thing I had a question about, because I remember it came up last time, you have an on-site firing range to test your firearms, right?
Correct.
But that's employee access for testing
Absolutely,
firearms. It's
yeah.
not going to be something that the public would be able to get to.
no, there will be no public access whatsoever.
Okay.
Will you have, so there's no, if someone was to purchase a firearm, they couldn't test fire in at your facility?
No, sir.
Anybody else have a question before I open this up?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, what's your brand name?
Yankee Hill Machine. That's the brand as
That,
well as.
if I bought a rifle, that's what it'd be called?
Yep. Yep.
Like Savage
Abbreviated
Arms
to
or
YHM typically.
Remington or Colt or whatever?
That would be Yankee Hill Machine.
You folks have any questions?
No, I felt that much of what's being proposed we discussed at length in the original
Yep.
application, and this is a semantic change more than a.
Can you buy me a firearm?
I mean, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else here have any comments or questions about this? No? Okay.
Do you feel like you still need to go because it's a special permit down through the list for her edification?
We can.
I don't
That's probably a good idea.
Just, it makes us.
So, conformance with the provisions and ordinances of the City of East Hampton, general laws of Massachusetts, and applicable state and federal rules and regulations. we've addressed all that. I don't think there's any question. Certainly the amendment doesn't seem to raise any of those. Protecting city amenities and abutting properties. I don't think this amendment has any impact on that. Vehicular and pedestrian movement within the site and in relationship to adjoining ways and properties. I don't think that this changes that. The amendment doesn't seem to change those considerations. Disposal of waste. I don't think you're going to have any additional waste by this change. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Drainage of surface and subsurface water, that's not going to be impacted. Wetlands will not be impacted. Adverse impacts on the city's resources, including water supply, sewage collection, fire protection, and streets, not impacted here. Loading and unloading of vehicles, do you think this will have sort of an increase or notable increase in sort of the deliveries or that? Or
And like I said, all the numbers that we estimated the first time around were based on this model.
included
so-
that anyways, okay. Integration of the building into the existing landscape is not an issue. Removal of vegetation isn't an issue. Dimensional standards hasn't changed. Prevent pollution of surface or groundwater, not going to change. Will not constitute a nuisance. I think the only thing about that was the indoor testing range, which is not changing from what we approved last time. And so, as I understand it too, the one condition we had about sealing the drains and the floor, that's already been completed, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess we don't even need to continue to have that condition in the amendment, because it's been done.
I have one question. You said that you have 6 managers who will each have a key to that place.
The way that our operation currently works, that's how it will be. Under the new location, only people who need direct access, basically whoever's going to run the store, do inventory checks, that type of thing, will have access.
Yeah, because I was a little worried about so many keys being out there.
Well, I remember too, we talked in the past about the requirements for hiring for those positions, right? And the sort of background checks and that kind of thing. I assume that's all still the same
Surprisingly
process.
enough, the ATF doesn't really have any requirements
Yeah,
for
I guess.
storage and hiring, so we try to go above and beyond so that
Right.
we don't have to deal with those folks.
Excellent. Okay, anybody else have any other comments, questions, conditions?
I motion to approve the amendment to the special permit for 412 Main Street, Yankee Hill Machine.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstaining, all right. Thank you.
I just like to make one off-the-record comment. A bad neighbor is a bad neighbor, whether it be a house, a condo, or a cottage.
On that note.
That was good.
That was on the
I will
record.
entertain a motion to adjourn.
I obtain that. I would say, I would make a motion
Can you get
to adjourn.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
I just have to
all
get
for
it
your
out of my
patience.
mouth.